Welcome to Potter Read, today's adventure. Minerva McGonagall took Harry from the Dursleys at age 4 and raised him as her own heir. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Cupboard Under the Stairs. The tabby cat had been sitting on the garden wall of number 6 Privet Drive for the better part of an hour, and in all that time nobody had thought to wonder why. That was the genius of the shape, of course. A cat could watch a street the way a clock watches a room, patient and unremarkable, and the people of Privet Drive prided themselves on never noticing anything that did not fit the rules they had agreed upon among themselves. A cat on a wall fit the rules. So the milkman came and went, and Mrs. Number 7 trimmed a hedge that did not need trimming, and a child 2 doors down practiced wobbling figure eights on a bicycle, and none of them gave the tabby a second glance. Minerva McGonagall watched number 4. She had told herself the first year that she was only passing. The second year she had told herself nothing, because by then the lie had grown too thin to lean on, and she did not waste good lies on her own conscience. It was the third autumn now. 3 Halloweens since she had stood on this same curb in the dark, and listened to a great fool of a wise man tell her that the worst sort of muggles in England were the safest place on earth for Lily Evans's son, and 3 autumns since she had let herself be persuaded by a voice that sounded like wisdom and a phrase that sounded like a plan. The greater good. She had a Scottish distrust of any good so great it required a child to bear it. There had been Arabella Figg, of course, who lived 2 streets over and minded the child on occasion, and reported what she saw to the headmaster in dutiful little notes that went, Minerva had since learned, into a drawer and no further. Arabella was a squib and a good soul and frightened of being thought a nuisance, and her notes had grown careful over the years in the way that notes grow careful when no one acts on the alarming ones. He is very quiet, he does not eat much. They do not give him a cake on his birthday, but I suppose that is their way. Minerva had read copies of those notes a week ago, having gone to the trouble of asking for them, and it was the phrase "I suppose that is their way" that had brought her back to this curb tonight. She had heard that phrase used to excuse a great deal in her time. She had used it herself on a doorstep 3 years ago. She did not intend to use it again. A window lit up on the ground floor of number 4, the kitchen. Through the nets she could see the broad pink shape of Vernon Dursley lowering himself into a chair, and the thin sharp shape of his wife setting a plate in front of him, and a third shape, much smaller, that did not sit at the table at all. It stood by the counter. It was given something. It was sent away. The tabby's tail moved once against the brick, slow as a metronome. She had come the first 2 years and seen a garden kept and a car waxed and a fat little Dudley Dursley shrieking through the sprinklers in the heat, and she had let the orderliness of the place do its work on her. Tidy people, she had thought, the way one thinks a thing one wishes were true, but a kept garden tells you about the gardener and nothing about the cupboards, and Minerva had spent 50 years teaching children. She knew the difference between a child who was small for his age and a child who was kept small. She had begun this autumn to suspect she had been reading the garden and not the child, so tonight she had not stayed on the wall. Tonight, while the Dursleys ate their supper, she had jumped down into the flower bed and slipped along the side of the house, low to the cold earth, to the little vent at the base of the wall under the front steps. Cats are made for low places. She had put her whiskered face to the slats and looked into the dark beneath the stairs. There was a cot in there. Not a cot, she corrected herself, the correction landing somewhere cold and exact. A mattress, thin as a folded coat, a blanket gone gray, a row of crayon marks on the underside of the steps where a child had counted something or tried to, and a single broken soldier with one arm. The smell that came through the slats was the smell of a place that was cleaned around and never into. She had seen battlefields, she had carried students out of them. She found, kneeling in the flower bed of number 4 Privet Drive in the body of a cat, that the cot under the stairs had undone something in her that war had not managed. Minerva McGonagall stood up out of the shape between one breath and the next, tall and gray and entirely herself, and her wand was already in her hand. She did not knock. The lock of the front door was a Muggle lock, and Muggle locks have opinions about brass and tumblers, and not one opinion that matters to a witch in a temper. The door swung wide and let the autumn in, and Minerva walked into the hall of number 4 with the particular unhurried stride of a woman who has decided that the time for hurrying is over. What in the blazes? Vernon Dursley came out of the kitchen with a napkin still tucked into his collar and his face going from pink to a deep and dangerous plum. He was a large man. He had spent a great deal of his life being large at people and watching them give way. "Who the devil are you? Get out of my house, get out, I'll have the police on you." "You will have nothing of the sort," Minerva said. Her voice was not loud. It was the voice she used on the first day of term, on the worst of them, the voice that found the back of a great hall without ever being raised. "Sit down, Mr. Dursley, before you fall down." He did not sit down, but he stopped, which was nearly the same thing, because a man who stops to think has already lost the argument with a McGonagall. Petunia Dursley stood frozen in the kitchen doorway with a tea towel twisted in both hands, and her eyes went to the wand, and the long bones of her face went the color of dishwater. She knew exactly what she was looking at. She had spent a childhood looking at a sister who could do things like this and a lifetime pretending she had not. "You're one of them," she breathed, "one of her lot." "I am Professor Minerva McGonagall," she said, "of Hogwarts. I taught your sister." She let that sit in the hall a moment, the name of the dead between them. "And I have come for the child you keep under the stairs." A door at the foot of the staircase, a bolt across it, slid high where a 4-year-old could not reach. Minerva looked at the bolt, and she looked at Petunia Dursley, and a great many things she had been keeping behind her teeth for 3 years arranged themselves into a silence that was worse than shouting. "He's a freak," Vernon got out, the word coming up out of him like something he had practiced in private. "A burden. We never asked for him, we never wanted him, dumped on the doorstep like a bottle of milk. You've no idea what we've put up with, the things that happen around him, the sheer unnaturalness of it. Be quiet." She did not look at him when she said it. She crossed the hall, and she drew back the bolt, and she opened the door under the stairs. The smell came up first. Then the dark, and in the dark a child. He had pressed himself back against the slope of the underside of the steps, knees to his chest, arms wrapped round his shins. He was small. He was very small, smaller than a 4-year-old has any business being, and his hair was a black tangle that had clearly never met a kindness from a comb, and beneath it 2 green eyes looked out at her with the flat, careful watchfulness of something that has learned not to hope at noises. There was a thin line on his forehead, half hidden by the fringe, shaped like a stroke of lightning frozen in skin. He did not cry. That was the thing that nearly finished her. A child of 4 with a stranger filling the only doorway of the only world he knew, and he did not cry because crying had taught him nothing worth knowing. "Hello," said Minerva McGonagall, and she crouched down slowly so that the height went out of her, so that there was less of her to be afraid of. Her knees protested. She ignored them. "My name is Minerva. I am not going to touch you unless you would like me to. May I tell you something true?" The green eyes flicked to her face and away. "I knew your mother," she said. "Her name was Lily. She had your eyes, exactly your eyes, and she was one of the cleverest girls I ever taught, and she loved you more than her own life. I am going to take you away from this house. You are never going to sleep in this place again. You understand me?" A long quiet. Somewhere behind her, Vernon Dursley was beginning to inflate again, gathering breath for outrage, and Minerva lifted one hand off her knee without turning round, and he subsided like a kettle taken off the heat. The child's voice, when it came, was a thread. "Are you cross with me?" She had been a teacher for half a century. She had learned long ago to keep her face from doing what her chest did. "No, Lenin," she said, and the old Gaelic word came up out of some buried childhood of her own. "I am not cross with you. I have never in my life been less cross with anyone." She held out her hand, palm up, the way one offers a hand to a creature that has been struck before. "Will you come out of there? You needn't take my hand. You may walk beside me, but I should very much like to give you a better place to sit than this." He looked at the hand. He looked at the dark behind him, which was the only thing he had ever been given to call his. And then, on legs unsteady from sitting, Harry Potter crawled out of the cupboard under the stairs and stood up in the hall of number 4 Privet Drive, and put his cold fingers into the hand of a woman he had met 1 minute before because she had said the word true and had not flinched when he asked if she was angry. "There," Minerva said. Her voice did the thing she had not let her face do. She mastered it. "There, good lad." She rose. She kept his hand. She turned, with the child half behind her skirts, and faced the Dursleys across their own hall, and the temperature of the room went down several degrees that had nothing to do with the open door. "Now," she said, "you will listen, because I will say it once. There exists a court in the world your sister came from that takes a very dim view of how the magical orphans of war are treated by the relations who agreed to take them in. I could bring this child before that court with a record of what I have seen tonight, and I could see this house emptied of everything you own and the 2 of you set to scrubbing cauldrons for the rest of your natural lives, and I would sleep the sounder for it." She let them imagine it. Vernon's mouth worked. Petunia had gone very still. "I am not going to do that. Do you know why?" Neither of them answered. "Because it would mean this child spends 1 more hour in the company of either of you while the papers are filed, and that I will not allow." She bent, and with a flick of her wand she sent the broken one-armed soldier flying out of the cupboard and into her free hand, and she gave it to Harry, and he took it as though it were spun glass. "We are leaving. You will not look for him. You will not speak of him. If anyone with my sort of eyes ever comes asking, you will say he was sent away to a fine school in Scotland, which will have the considerable advantage of being true. And if I ever learn that you have treated your own Dudley to so much as a single sweet bought with money sent for this child's keep, I will know. I always know. Good evening." She did not slam the door behind her. She left it standing open to the cold, which she judged, on balance, to be the worse insult. The night air of Privet Drive was thin and orange under the street lamps, and smelled of cut grass and someone's bonfire 2 gardens over. Harry walked at her side down the path, both hands now wrapped around the soldier, his bare feet quick on the cold paving because she had conjured him no shoes yet, and there had not been any in the cupboard worth the name. At the gate she stopped and crouched again. "We are going to travel a way that will feel strange," she told him. "Like being pulled through a very small door very fast. It will be over in a moment, and it will not hurt you. I will hold you the whole time. You may close your eyes if you like." She paused. Do you trust me? He considered the question with the gravity of someone for whom it was not a small one. You came, he said at last, and from the plain weight he gave the two words she understood that it settled the matter entirely, and perhaps it did. Minerva McGonagall gathered the child up against her shoulder, bone-light, colder than any child should be, and turned on the spot, and the orange street and the open door and the whole tidy lie of Privet Drive folded into nothing and were gone. They came out into Highland dark. The difference was so total that Harry's whole body went rigid against her, and she felt it, and she did not loosen her hold, but neither did she tighten it. There were no street lamps here. There was the great black bulk of the hill, and the paler black of the loch below it catching what little there was of the moon, and a sky so thick with stars that a child raised under a Surrey orange glow could be forgiven for thinking the roof had come off the world. The wind off the water smelled of peat and cold stone, and the rowan tree by the door, which had been planted by her grandmother to keep ill luck off the threshold, and had outlived 3 generations of the people it guarded. This is Cairnloch, Minerva said into his hair. It was my mother's house and her mother's. It is mine now, and tonight it is yours as well, for as long as you want it. She felt him turn his face out of her shoulder just enough to look. That is the loch, Loch Can. In the morning you will see it has herons. That is the rowan tree. The door is behind it. There is a fire inside, and there is going to be soup, and there is going to be a bath, and then there is going to be a bed that is yours and only yours, with no bolt on the outside of any door near it. Come along. The house took them in the way old houses do, with the smell of wood smoke and old books and the constant small ticking of a clock that had measured out more grief and more joy than any living person remembered. Minerva set the child down on the hearthrug in front of the banked fire and knelt to build it up, and while the flames climbed she watched him out of the side of her eye as she had watched the street, and learned more in 5 minutes than the Dursleys had let her learn in 3 years. He did not run about, he did not touch anything. He stood exactly where she had put him, on the very edge of the rug, holding the soldier, his eyes going round the room and cataloguing it, the door, the windows, the height of the shelves, the roots. A child in a strange place looks for the toys. This child looked for the exits. He had the watchfulness of a soldier billeted in occupied country, and he was 4 years old, and Minerva had to turn her face to the fire for a moment and tend it longer than the fire required. Are you hungry? She asked when she had her voice. He didn't answer, which she understood was its own answer, the answer of a child who had learned that saying yes to that question was a way of getting into trouble. I am going to make soup, she said, answering the yes he had not given, because I am hungry, and it is rude to eat soup in front of a guest without offering him a bowl. You may have as much as you like. If you do not want it, you may leave it, and no one will say a word. She rose, joints clicking, and went to the kitchen end of the long room, and she made a great deal of ordinary noise, the clatter of the pot and the pump of the tap and the strike of the match for the range, so that the silence would not be a thing he had to fill. Cooking by hand tonight, the magic could wait. He had had a wand swept through his world an hour ago and a disapparition since, and what the child needed now was a woman doing the most ordinary thing in creation 6 feet away from him and not watching him do anything at all. She heard after a while the soft pad of bare feet leaving the rug. She did not turn. By the time the soup was hot he was standing at the corner of the kitchen table, just within the warmth, watching her hands. Lentil and bacon, she said to the pot. My mother made it on cold nights, and it is too cold tonight for anything else. She ladled 2 bowls. She set one at the place nearest the fire and one across from it, and she sat down at the far place herself, leaving the warm one for him, and she began to eat her own without ceremony, 2 people at supper in the small hours, and nothing in the world more natural about it. It took him the length of her first 3 spoonfuls to climb onto the chair. It took him longer than that to touch the spoon. When he finally ate, he ate the way the starved eat, fast and low over the bowl with one arm curled round it, and twice he stopped and looked up at her to see if it would be taken away, and both times she simply went on eating her own, and both times he went back to his. She gave him a second bowl without asking. He ate half of it and fell asleep at the table, upright, the spoon still in his fist, the soldier in his lap, in the boneless instant collapse of a child who has been holding himself awake out of vigilance, and has finally, against every instinct, decided he might be allowed to stop. Minerva sat and watched him sleep for a moment in the firelight. Then she rose very quietly and went to the writing desk by the window and took out a quill, and wrote a note in a hand that did not shake because she would not let it. Poppy, come to Cairnloch as soon as you are able, and bring your bag. Tell no one where you have gone. There is a child here who needs your eyes, and I need yours and no others. She whistled low, and the old grey owl that lived in the rafters of the byre came in at the window like a folded ghost, and took the note and was gone over the lock before the ink was dry. The bath she managed without waking him fully, which was its own mercy, because she did not think either of them was ready for the sort of things a bath might reveal. He surfaced halfway through into a drowsy, trusting confusion, and let her wash 3 years of Privet Drive out of his hair, and the water that ran off him was not the color water should be, and Minerva McGonagall, who had not wept at funerals because she had been needed to organize them, washed a 4-year-old's hair in her mother's tin bath by the fire and was glad of the steam on her spectacles. She found on his back and along his arms the kind of marks that fade and the kind that do not. She counted them the way one counts evidence, carefully, without comment, with a cold, clean part of her mind that was already drafting the letter she would never need to send to a court that would never need to convene, because she was going to make quite certain none of it ever came to that. Then she wrapped him in the largest towel in the house and carried him up the narrow stair to the room under the eaves that had been hers as a girl, where she had aired the bed that very afternoon on a hope she had not let herself name, and she laid him in it. The tartan blanket was folded at the foot of the bed. It was old, the red gone soft and the green gone gray-green, the McGonagall set woven by a grey-tant who had died before Minerva was born. She drew it up over the child and tucked it, and the fingers found the wool in his sleep and gripped it the way they had gripped her hand in the hall and did not let go. She meant to go. She found she could not quite yet. She drew the chair from the corner to the side of the bed and sat down in it, and the house ticked around them, and the wind worked at the rowan, and at some point in the small hours the child surfaced again, briefly, eyes barely open, and looked at the dark and found her in it. "You still here?" he said. It was not a question, it was a fact he was checking, the way you check a step in the dark with your foot before you trust your weight to it. "I am still here," said Minerva. In the morning, she thought of all the careful, kind, conditional things an adult says to a child to keep from making a promise she cannot be sure of keeping. She discarded every one of them. "I will tell you something now," she said, "and you may hold me to it for the rest of your life. I will not lie to you. Not ever, other people will, I will not. If a thing is true and it is hard, I will tell you it is true and it is hard, and I will not pretend it is easy. And if a thing is good, I will not pretend it is small to spare you. So hear me say a good thing and a true one. In the morning, Lennon, I will still be here. I will be here to make the porridge, and I will be here when you wake, and I will be here a very great many mornings after that. Do you believe me?" He did not answer in words. But the grip on the blanket eased, and his eyes closed, and the watchfulness went out of his face the way frost goes off a window when the sun finds it, and he slept, properly slept, for what she suspected was the first such night in the whole of his life under a roof that meant him only good. Poppy Pomfrey arrived a little after 3, brisk and quiet, with her cloak buttoned wrong over her nightdress and her bag already open in her hand. She took one look at Minerva's face in the doorway and asked no question she could answer for herself. She went up the stair. She was a long time in the room under the eaves, gentle as snowfall, and when she came down again she sat at the kitchen table and accepted the tea Minerva put in front of her and did not drink it for a while. "Well," Poppy said at last, and her voice was not brisk now at all. "He'll mend, children, mend. The body mends faster than you'd think, and faster than the rest of it, which is the cruelty of the thing, because people see a child eating well and running about and they decide he's all better." She turned the cup on its saucer. "Underfed for years, Minerva, not days, years. Old breaks in the left forearm that set themselves crooked because no one took him to be seen to. Scarring that did not come from falling off bicycles. He's frightened of cupboards," she went on, more quietly still. "I went to look at his arm, and he thought I meant to shut him somewhere I could see it. He went away behind his own eyes and waited for it. A child learns that. A child is not born knowing to brace for a closing door." She pressed her lips together. "And he thanked me for the examination. For my prodding at his sore arm in the middle of the night, he thanked me very politely, because somebody taught him that the rent on being a burden is to be grateful out loud for every breath he is allowed to take. That is the part I should most like to undo, and it is the part that will take the longest." She drank her tea then because she needed something to do with her hands and looked up, and there was something in the homely, competent face that had gone very hard. "Who did this?" "His aunt," Minerva said, "and his uncle, his mother's sister." The words tasted of metal. "The people Albus Dumbledore chose. The people Albus Dumbledore told me on that doorstep were the safest place in Britain for Lily's son. The blood," he said, "the protection of the blood, blood that turns its own children into servants," and he stood on a doorstep and called it protection. Poppy was quiet. She had known Minerva 40 years. She knew the difference between the things Minerva said and the things Minerva had decided. "He'll want him back," she said. It was not a warning, it was a weather report. "When he learns. And he will learn, he always learns. Let him want." Minerva looked toward the dark stair, toward the room where a child slept under a blanket older than either of them, holding a one-armed soldier and a fistful of wool. "He had 3 years to do better, Poppy, and he did not so much as send an owl to check. He left a baby on a doorstep in November and went home to his lemon drops, and he called it a plan. I am 66 years old. I have followed that man through one war and into the teeth of a second, and I have trusted his judgment over my own more times than I can count, and I was wrong too, at least the once, and the once is asleep upstairs." She drew breath. "He may come. He may bring the ministry and the law, and that voice he uses, the gentle one, the one that makes you feel you are the only fool in a room full of wise men. He will find that I have grown rather tired of feeling like a fool. And he will find that I have read the law too." Poppy reached across the table and put her worn hand over Minerva's. "You'll not be doing it alone," she said. "Whatever it is you have decided to do, No, Minerva agreed. I rather think I won't. They sat a while in the ticking quiet. Then Poppy gathered her bag and left a careful row of instructions on the table, in her cramped clear hand, about feeding and sleep and the not pushing of a child who flinched from kindness, and she pressed Minerva's shoulder once and went out into the dark to make her way back to the school before the castle woke, and wondered where its matron had gone. Minerva did not go to bed. She sat in the kitchen as the black of the window went charcoal and the charcoal went gray, and she made the porridge before she needed to, so that it would be ready, so that the good true thing she had promised in the dark would be waiting when he came down. The herons came up off the lock in the first light, two of them gray and unhurried, exactly as she had told him they would. The owl came with the dawn. It was not her owl. It was a handsome tawny she knew well, and it carried a letter sealed with violet wax and the seal of the Headmaster of Hogwarts, and it tapped at the kitchen window with the particular confident insistence of a bird that has never once been refused entry anywhere. Minerva looked at it across the warm room, with the porridge thickening on the range and the heron light coming gray-gold off the water and a child asleep upstairs for the first night of the rest of his life, and she did not get up at once to let it in. She let it tap. She finished her tea. There was, she found, a certain steadiness to be had in keeping a headmaster's owl waiting. Then she rose and opened the window and took the letter and broke the violet seal with her thumb, and read, in the slanting silver-blue hand she had read on 1,000 notes across 40 years, the words she had known would be there before the bird had crossed the lock. My dear Minerva, I think you and I had better talk. She set the letter beside the porridge pot. Upstairs a floorboard creaked, the particular creak of a child waking in a strange room and lying very still to learn whether the world had kept its promises overnight. I'm coming, Lenin, she called up in the ordinary voice of an ordinary house with an ordinary breakfast on. The porridge is on and the herons are up. Come and see. She did not in the end need to go up. By the time she had the bowls down off the dresser, there was the sound of a child on the stair, one careful tread at a time, both hands no doubt on the wall. He came to the bottom and stopped, half in the doorway, the tartan blanket dragged down with him and wrapped round his shoulders like a chieftain's plaid 3 sizes too long, the one-armed soldier still in his fist. He had slept in the shirt she had conjured him, which was already too big and now thoroughly slept in, and his hair stood up at the back in a fashion that no comb in Scotland was going to mend before midwinter. He looked at the kitchen in the grey-gold light. He looked at her at the range. He was working something out, and she let him work it and did not hurry him with her eyes. You're here, he said. I told you I would be. He came the rest of the way in slow, the blanket whispering on the flagstones. He did not climb onto a chair this time. He came round the table to the window, drawn by the cold light off the water, and went up on his toes to see, and could not, being 4 and small for it. Without a word, Minerva drew out the tall stool that had stood by that window since she herself had been too small to see over the sill, and set it there, and he climbed onto it and knelt up and put both hands flat on the glass. The 2 herons were working the shallows below the Rowan, grey and patient, lifting one impossible stilt of a leg at a time. One of them stabbed the water and came up with a silver flicker and tipped its head back to swallow, and a sound came out of the child that Minerva had not heard from him yet and would have walked a long way to hear again. It was not a laugh, quite. It was the surprised first cousin of one, a caught huff of delight that startled him as much as it startled the heron, and he looked round at her at once to see whether delight was permitted. That one's called the General, Minerva said, as though she had not just watched a wall come down. He has fished that exact stretch of bank since before you were born, and he has never once said good morning to me, the rude old article. The other is his lady, and she catches twice what he does and lets him think otherwise. She brought a bowl to the window ledge. Porridge. Now, there is a question that comes with it, and the question is yours to answer however you please, and there is no wrong answer to be had because it is your porridge and not mine. Wariness flickered back into his face at the word question. Honey, said Minerva, holding up the pot, or brown sugar. She held up the other. Or if you happen to be the sort of person who likes a thing that is both at once, which is a perfectly respectable sort of person to be, you may have a spoon of each, and I shall not think the worse of you. Some of the best people I have ever known cannot make up their minds about anything before noon. She set both pots down where he could reach them. Which would you like? He looked at the 2 pots for a long moment, with the seriousness of a man diffusing something. She understood that he had likely never in his life been handed 2 good things and told to choose between them. That choice itself was the strange country here, stranger than the loch or the herons or the stars without a roof. She turned away to her own bowl deliberately to take her eyes off him, because a choice made under a watching adult is no choice at all. When she looked back, there was a careful spoonful of honey and a careful spoonful of sugar going into the porridge, and the child was stirring them together with the absorbed gravity of an alchemist, and the blanket had slipped off one shoulder and he had forgotten for the length of a heartbeat to be afraid. Both, she said gravely, a respectable choice. Both, he agreed around the first mouthful, and then remembering himself, hunched a little and waited. Nothing happened. The fire ticked. The the herons fished. The porridge stayed in front of him, and the woman across the table went on eating her own, and the world did not, after all, end because a child had taken a second thing he wanted. He finished the bowl. He set the spoon down with great care, square to the rim, and looked at her with the wariness back in full, the look of a child arriving at the part of the morning where the bill comes due. "What do you want me to do?" he said, "for the food and the bed?" He was already half off the stool. "I can do floors, I'm good at floors, and the garden I weeded, I know weeds, and I don't break things hardly ever, and I can be quiet, I can be very quiet. Sit down, Harry." She said it without heat, and he sat because the absence of heat was somehow steadier than any shout would have been. "Now hear me, for this is another true thing, and I will say it as plainly as I said the first. In this house food is not bought, it is not earned, and it cannot be lost. You do not pay rent for being alive, not to me, not to anyone, not ever again. There will be chores in their time, because a person likes to be useful and a house likes to be kept, and you and I will share them out the way two people who live together share them. But that is a different matter altogether from what was done to you, and you will learn the difference if it takes me the rest of my days to teach it." She filled his cup with milk he had not asked for and set it by his hand. "Do you understand the difference yet?" "No," he admitted. "Good, an honest answer, and I would rather have an honest no than a frightened yes any day of the week." She sat back. "You will understand it by and by. For now you need only believe that it is true, and let me carry the understanding for the both of us until you are grown enough to take your half of it from me." He turned this over with the same gravity he had given the honey and the sugar. Then he picked up the milk because she had set it down and not taken it back, and he drank it, watching her over the rim, and some calculation behind the green eyes adjusted itself by a single careful degree in her favor. "There is a great deal I have to tell you, Harry," Minerva said after a while, gently, not looking up from her own bowl. "About who you are and who your mother and father were and the world you come from, which is a stranger and a finer place than that street ever let you guess. But none of it is for this morning. This morning there is only porridge and herons and a stool by a window that is yours now whenever you want it. The rest will keep. We have time." She let herself look at him, then knelt up on the old stool with his porridge and his blanket and his ruined hair gone gold in the window light. "We have a great deal of time, I mean to see to that." He did not understand all of it. He was 4. But he understood that the stool was his, and the window was his, and the herons came every morning, and that across the table there was a tall, stern person in spectacles who had said she would be there in the morning and then had been, which was, as far as Harry Potter had so far been able to determine in his short and careful life, the most reliable thing that had ever happened to him. He turned back to the glass to watch the general miss a fish, and laughed outright this time, the whole bright sound of it filling the old kitchen, and Minerva McGonagall sat in her mother's house with the headmaster's folded letter beside the porridge pot and a war she had not yet declared waiting somewhere out beyond the loch, and decided that whatever it cost her, the price would be cheap. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the house at Cairnloch. By the turning of the year, the house had taught him its mornings. He woke now without the long listening that had once come first, the lying still to learn whether the floor was safe. He woke to the smell of the porridge and the grey light off the loch, and he came down the stair on his own, 2 feet to a step still but quicker than he had been, the tartan blanket left folded on the bed because the kitchen was warm and he had learned to trust that it would be. The sergeant came with him. He had named the soldier sergeant after a word in one of Minerva's books that he liked the shape of, and the sergeant sat at the corner of the table through every meal, propped against the salt, surveying the room with his one good arm and his chipped, painted face, and was consulted on matters of importance. "The sergeant says it is too cold for school today," Harry announced, climbing onto the stool by the window. "The sergeant is a soldier and has no opinions on arithmetic," said Minerva, setting his bowl down. "Honey or sugar?" "Both." "Both," she agreed, as she agreed every morning because the agreeing was half the point of it. The herons were at the bank. The general missed his fish, which he did 4 mornings out of 5, and his lady caught hers, which she did 5 mornings out of 5, and Harry narrated the whole campaign in a low running murmur around his spoon while Minerva poured the tea. He watched her do it sidelong and complete, missing nothing. She put the milk in last. She always put the milk in last. He had asked her in November why, and she had given him a short lecture on the scalding of milk and the proper warming of the pot that he had received with the gravity of Scripture, and ever since it had become a thing between them, a daily argument conducted entirely without disagreement. "Milk first is wrong," he said now, to the window, by way of reminding the herons. "Milk first is barbarism," Minerva corrected. "There is a difference. Wrong is a thing you may grow out of. Barbarism is a way of life." She set his cup, milk clasped by his hand. "Drink your tea. We have lessons." Lessons had begun in October and were, as far as Harry could tell, simply the name Minerva gave to the times when she taught him things on purpose rather than by accident, which was most of the time. There were letters which he had taken to with a hunger that had made her go quiet and tend the fire again. There were numbers which he liked because they did not change their minds. There were the names of the herons and the rowan and the hills across the water, and there was a great cracked atlas she spread on the floor so he could put his whole hand flat on countries. And there was, lately, the matchstick. The matchstick lived in a box on the mantel, and it came down once a day, and Minerva would set it on the table between them and look at it, and tell him to look at it too. Not the way you look at the porridge, she said, wondering when you may start. Look at it the way you look at the herons, as though you mean to know it. He did not yet know what they were looking for. But he looked every day because she did, and because when they looked at the matchstick together the kitchen went very still, and the stillness was a good one, a held one, the kind you did not want to be the one to break. He had begun, that winter, to ask the question under the question, which Minerva privately thought the most promising thing about him, and the most exhausting thing besides. When she told him the matchstick was made of wood, he asked what wood was, and when she told him it had once been a tree, he asked whether a thing could be turned back into what it had been before, and whether the tree remembered being a tree, and whether, if you turned the matchstick into a needle and then back again, it would be the same matchstick or only one that looked like it. She had no good answer to the last, which delighted her, because the great theorists of transfiguration had no good answer to it either, and had been quarreling about it in heavy books for 400 years. You are asking, she told him, whether a thing is its shape or its history. That is a very old question and a very large one, and people have built whole towers of thought upon it and then knocked one another's towers down for sport. I will make you a bargain. You learn to read well enough to climb the towers yourself, and I will show you where they are kept. She tapped the spine of a fat green book on a shelf he could not yet reach. That one, when you are ready. It argues that a thing is its history, and it is wrong, but it is wrong in a fashion that took a genius to manage, and you will learn more from a clever wrong book than from a dull right one any day of the week. Harry looked up at the green book the way other children looked at the top shelf of a sweet shop, and Minerva made a private note to have him reading it inside 2 years, and was very nearly right. He did not know that she was waiting. She was a patient woman, and she had taught a great many children, and she knew that the magic would come when it came, that it could not be drilled into a frightened child like a multiplication table, that it would arrive the way the herons arrived, on its own gray wings when the water was calm enough to fish. The water was not yet calm. She knew that too. He flinched still at a raised voice that was not hers, at the bang of a dropped pot, at the particular sound a door made closing. He hoarded bread. She found heels and crusts tucked behind books, under the bed, in the pocket of the coat she had bought him, going stale in their hiding, and she did not say a word about it, only made certain there was always more bread than 2 people could eat, and let him learn at his own pace that the supply would not stop. Poppy had told her it would take the longest, and Poppy had been right, and Minerva had decided that she had the longest and more besides, and was in no hurry. What she was in a hurry about that January was the law. She did not tell Harry where she was going. She told him only that Madame Pomfrey was coming to sit with him for the afternoon, that she herself had business in the city and would be back before the lamps were lit, and that he was to mind Poppy and show her the herons. He took the news as he took most news that involved her leaving, which was to go very quiet and watchful, and to ask, in a voice he tried to keep light, whether she would be back in the morning. She crouched to his level as she had on a Surrey doorstep, and reminded him of the true thing she had promised, and watched it do its work, and rose and went. Gringotts in winter was a cathedral of cold marble, and the goblins behind the long counters did not look up for storms or fashions or for witches in a temper, which was, Minerva thought, rather to their credit. She gave her name and her business to a teller who weighed both without expression and sent her, after the requisite weight designed to remind every wizard of their place, down a corridor of green-flamed lamps to a door of black iron with a name etched upon it in a hand like knives. The goblin behind the desk was old by the look of him, his face folded into the particular sharpness that goblins wore into great age, and he did not rise, and he did not offer her tea, and Minerva liked him at once for both. A brass plate on the desk read GORNUK, and beneath it, in smaller letters, accounts of ancient standing. Professor McGonagall. He set down his quill with the precision of a man docking a ship. You have come about the Potter, child. I've come about the Potter estate, she said, sitting without being asked, because to wait for a goblin's invitation was to wait until spring. And about the child who is its heir, who is at present in my care, and who I intend shall remain there. I should like to know where matters stand. I should like to know it exactly. Gornuk regarded her for a moment over the steeple of his long fingers. Most who sit in that chair, he said, wish to know where matters stand chiefly so that they may improve their own. You will forgive a goblin his suspicions. We are made of them. I have no claim on a single galleon of that child's gold, Minerva said, and I will sign whatever oath your people care to draw up to that effect, in blood if blood is the currency you prefer. I am not here for the estate. I am here because someone ought to have come 3 years ago, and no one did, and I have grown tired of waiting for my betters to remember their consciences. Something moved in the old goblin's face that was not quite a smile, goblins not being given to smiles, but was a cousin of one. He drew a ledger toward him, a great black book bound in something that was not leather, and opened it to a page held by a ribbon, and turned it to face her. Then I will tell you exactly, Professor, he said, because exactness is the only kindness my people deal in, and because what has been done to this account offends me, and a goblin who is offended is a useful ally to those he is not offended by. Attend. What he told her in the greenlit cold of that iron room, she would remember for the rest of her life, and would draw upon more than once in the years to come. The House of Potter was old, older than the goblins had at first records of, an ancient family of comfortable wealth that had married cleverness to gold for 40 generations and lost neither. There was a main vault, deep in the oldest part of the bank, sealed since the deaths of James and Lily Potter. There was a trust vault, opened by James's grandfather for the schooling of Potter children, which any Potter heir might draw upon from the age of 11. There were properties, a ruin in Godric's Hollow that the family had chosen to leave standing as it fell, a townhouse in a wizarding quarter long since shuttered, and a cottage in the west of Scotland, warded in waiting, kept all these years by a house elf still bound to the family, who had refused, the records noted dryly, every attempt to release her from a service whose masters were dead. And there was the matter of the will. James and Lily Potter, said Gornock, tapping a line with one black nail, lodged their last testament with this bank in the October before their deaths. It is the standing practice. A goblin witnessed will cannot be forged, cannot be altered, and cannot be set aside by any authority of wizards, the Wisengamot included, for the bank does not recognize the Wisengamot's writ within these walls. He paused, and the pause had an edge to it. It can be sealed mind. By the chief warlock in a time of war, in the interest of public order, a will may be sealed from execution until such time as he sees fit to unseal it. It is a power written for emergencies. It was not written to be sat upon for 3 years like an egg. Minerva's hands had gone still in her lap. Albus sealed the Potter's will. On the 2nd of November, in the year of their deaths, Gornock said, the day after he placed the child. The bank objected, as is its right and its custom, and was overruled, as is the chief warlock's. We are not permitted to act upon a sealed will. We are not forbidden to read it, though. The not smile again. Goblins read everything. It is a professional failing. Tell me what it says, he told her. The Potters had named guardians for their son in order against the day they could not raise him themselves, the way careful people in a war do. First, Sirius Black, his godfather. Should Sirius be unable or unfit, then Alice Longbottom, his godmother. Should Alice be unable, then a pair named together jointly, as a child is best given to a household and not a person. Minerva McGonagall and Poppy Pomfrey, with the cottage in the west settled upon the child's keeping, and the trust vault opened early for his needs. And below that, in Lily's own hand, witnessed and sealed and binding under the law of the bank, a single line that the goblin read aloud in his dry, precise voice without inflection, which made it land the harder. Under no circumstances and in no event, he read, is our son to be given into the keeping of my sister, Petunia Dursley, who does not love what she does not understand. The iron room was very quiet. Somewhere far off a cart rattled on its rails into the dark of the vaults. Sirius Black is in Azkaban, Minerva said at last, and her voice was steady because she made it so. Alice Longbottom is in the closed ward at St. Mungo's and will not leave it. That leaves the third provision, said Gornock, which has been in force in the eyes of this bank and of any honest reading of the law since the day the first two became impossible to fulfill. Which is to say, it has been in force for 3 years, during which the named guardians were never informed of their standing, because the document naming them was sealed by the one man who knew, and who chose instead to place the child precisely where his mother forbade. He closed the ledger. I do not know why he did it, Professor. That is wizard business, and I am paid not to care about wizard reasons. I know only that he did it, and that it is written, and that writing is the only thing in this world a goblin trusts. Minerva sat with it. She had come expecting difficulty, expecting to fight for standing she did not have, to build a case out of conscience and medical evidence and the sheer wrongness of a cupboard. She had not expected to find that the law had been on her side from the beginning, and that the only thing standing between her and it was a violet seal and a great man's certainty that he knew better than a dead mother's last written word. There have been withdrawals, she said. It was not a guess. The shape of the thing demanded it. There have been disbursements, Gornock corrected, from the trust vault, authorized by the child's magical guardian of record, who is also the chief warlock, who is also the one who sealed the will that would have named other guardians. The same hand, you understand, in all 3 places. The disbursements are modest and meticulously documented. A monthly sum to one Arabella Fig for services rendered in the watching of the child. Sundry payments to the relations, the Dursleys, for his keep. Something cold passed over the old face. For his keep, Professor, I have seen the child's measurements taken by your healer, which were lodged with this bank as evidence 3 weeks ago. I have done sums for 200 years. The gold that left this vault for that child's keep did not reach that child. I should be very interested in my professional capacity to learn where it went. So should I, said Minerva. So, I think, should a great many people in time. She drew breath, and when she spoke again, it was in the brisk cadence of a woman who has stopped grieving and begun working. Master Gornock, I am going to ask you to do several things, and I am going to ask you to tell me the cost of each, because I will not be in any man's debt nor any goblin's over this child. First, I want that will unsealed and executed. You said the chief warlock may unseal it when he sees fit. Is there any other road? One, said Gornuk, and now he did lean forward, and the green light caught his eyes, and Minerva understood that she had found in the cold heart of the bank something rarer than an ally, a creature who had been waiting a long time for someone to ask the right question. A sealing in the interest of public order endures only so long as the public order requires it. The war is over. The Dark Lord is, by the Ministry's own proclamation, dead these 3 years. There is no emergency. Named guardian, upon learning of her standing, may petition the bank to test whether the conditions of the sealing still hold. The bank is most happy to make that test. The bank has been waiting 3 years for someone with standing to ask it to. He produced a sheet of heavy parchment from a drawer with the air of a thing that had been ready all along, which she suspected it had. You have standing, Professor. You learned of it 11 minutes ago in this room before a goblin witness. The clock has started. Sign here, and the bank will convene to test the sealing, and the chief warlock will be invited to show cause why an emergency that ended 3 years ago should keep a dead woman's wishes locked in our cellars 1 day longer. Minerva took up the quill. And the cost, she said, the nib already to the parchment. The bank's fee for executing a sealed potter will is a matter of long-standing arrangement and is drawn from the estate as is proper and need not trouble you. He watched her sign. The cost to you, Professor, is that you will have made an enemy of the most powerful wizard in Britain, who is accustomed to being thought the wisest and best of men, and who will not enjoy being shown to have sat upon a mother's last word for 3 years. He will not come at you with curses. He will come at you with kindness and with reasons and with the weight of his great good name, and that is a far harder thing to fight. Most who cross him discover they have lost the argument before they knew it had begun. He is very good at it. He has had 100 years of practice. I taught beside him for 30 of them, Minerva said, signing the second line, and I have watched him do it to better people than me. I am aware of the cost. I have done the sum, Master Gornuk, the same as you. The child is worth it. She set down the quill. Now, the cottage in the west and the elf who keeps it. I'll not have a living creature bound to a service in an empty house a day longer than need be. When the will is executed, the cottage passes to the child's keeping. The elf passes with it. The elf is Potter property in the wizard reckoning, said Gornuk, with a curl of distaste that told her precisely what the goblin reckoning thought of that, and yes, she passes with the estate to the heir. Her name is Tilly. She served the heir's grandparents, Fleamont and Euphemia Potter, and she has kept their cottage swept and their hedges trimmed and their fires laid for 3 years against the return of a family that will not return. She has refused her freedom 4 times. The matter, you will find, is not so simple as setting her loose. She does not wish to be loose. She wishes to serve a Potter. There happens to be one. There happens to be one, Minerva agreed quietly. He is 4 years old, and he hides bread behind my books because he is not yet sure the next meal is coming, and he will not be handing anyone orders for a good long while. But there will come a day when he wants to know everything there is to know about his grandparents and his father and the home his family kept, and on that day I should like there to be someone living who can tell him and who loved them. Let her keep the cottage. Tell her the heir is found and safe, and that he will come when he is ready and not before, and that no one will be releasing her against her will. That is the message. Can you send it? I can. Gornuk made a note in a smaller book. You are a strange sort of thief, Professor, who steals a fortune's heir and then declines the fortune. I am not a thief at all, she said, rising, drawing her cloak about her. I am a teacher who got tired of grading the world's neglect on a curve. Good afternoon, Master Gornuk. Send for me the moment the bank convenes, and send your bills to the estate, every nut itemized, so that when this is done no one alive can say Minerva McGonagall took a penny that was not hers. I should like that on the record. I should like a great deal on the record before we are through. The old goblin watched her go to the door, and just before she reached it he spoke again, and there was in his dry voice something she would not have expected to find in the cold of Gringotts, something almost like respect. He sent his payments to the squib and the relations, Gornuk said, and never once in 3 years to a healer. Not a single galleon for the mending of that child. I noted it at the time. I assumed it was none of my concern. A pause. I find, Professor, that I was mistaken about whose concern it was. The bank will move quickly. You have my word, and a goblin's word is the only thing in this building worth more than the gold. She came home before the lamps were lit, as she had promised. Poppy met her at the door with her finger to her lips and her face soft, and led her by the hand to the kitchen, where Harry had fallen asleep on the hearthrug with the great cracked atlas open beneath him and his cheek on Greenland and the sergeant standing guard by his head. He had, Poppy whispered, asked 4 times in the first hour whether Minerva was coming back, and then somewhere in the second hour had stopped asking, which Poppy thought the more important thing by far. He had shown her the herons. He had insisted she be taught the middle-class law of tea, and had corrected her twice. Minerva carried him up to bed without waking him, and that night she did not sleep, but it was a different not sleeping than the first night had been. She sat at the writing desk with a fresh stack of parchment and made lists in her sharp slanting hand of provisions and provisos in the names of honest people at the ministry, and somewhere past midnight she allowed herself the single thought that the law was on her side, and slept an hour in the chair and woke ready. Dumbledore came on the third day after. She had known he would. He did not send word, which was its own message, the message of a man who expects every door in Britain to open to him without the courtesy of knocking. He simply walked up from the lock at the gray end of the afternoon, robed in a blue the color of deep water, his beard tucked into his belt against the wind, and he stopped at the rowan tree by the door and looked up at it for a moment with an expression Minerva could not read from the window, and then he came on and knocked 3 soft taps, polite as a guest. She had sent Harry up to the room under the eaves with a book and the sergeant and instructions to stay until she called. He had gone without argument but not without understanding. He had learned the shape of her voice when something was coming, and he had taken one look at her face and gone up the stair quick and quiet, and she had heard the floorboard settle as he sat down just inside his door where he could hear, and had decided to allow it. He had a right, she thought, to hear someone fight for him. He had heard quite enough of the other kind of thing through doors. Minerva. Dumbledore's smile was the one she had seen turned on frightened first-years and trembling ministers alike, warm as a hearth and twice as practiced. You have made a home of your mother's house, it suits you. May an old colleague come in out of the wind, you may come in, Albus. She stood aside, she did not return the smile. I'll not pretend you're welcome, but you may come in, sit. I'll make tea, since I am Scottish and the rite must be observed even at a wake. He sat at her table in the chair that was not Harry's, and he set upon it a paper bag, twisted at the top, and pushed it an inch toward the center as an offering. Sherbet lemon, no, you never did. Lily liked them. Did you know that? She would take them by the handful from the dish on my desk, the year she was head girl, and pretend she had not. His eyes, blue and bright behind the half-moons, moved once about the kitchen, taking in the second stool by the window, the coat on the peg, the heels of bread he could not have known the meaning of but surely catalogued. Where is he, Minerva? Safe, she said, setting the kettle on. Warm, fed, sleeping through the night, more nights than not, which is more than he managed in the place you left him. He is upstairs, and he will stay there until I am satisfied that the conversation we are about to have will not frighten him, and I rather think it will, so I expect he will stay there a good while. The warmth did not leave Dumbledore's face, but something gathered behind it, the way weather gathers behind a clear sky. You took him from his home. I took him from a cupboard. She said it without raising her voice, milk-classed, pouring 2 cups, setting his before him, though she knew he would not drink it. Cupboard under the stairs, Albus, with a bolt on the outside and a mattress like a folded coat. He is 4 years old and the size of a child of 2.5, and his left arm was broken once and never set, and he hoards bread because he does not believe in the next meal, and he thanked Poppy Pomfrey for examining his injuries because someone taught him to be grateful for any attention that did not end in pain. That is the home you chose for the son of the bravest woman either of us ever taught. I have the measurements, I have the healer's testimony. I have, as of 3 days ago, a great deal more than that besides, so let us not begin with home. Let us begin somewhere we can both stand to stay. For a moment he did not answer. The wind worked at the rowan. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into the register she had heard him use to end wars and unmake men, gentle and vast and patient, the voice that made you feel that to disagree with it was to disagree with the turning of the seasons. You see a cupboard, he said, because you love him, and love sees what is in front of it. I am obliged to see further. I am sorry for it. I would give a great deal to be a man who could afford to see only the cupboard. And the untouched cup a quarter turn on its saucer. When Lily died for her son Minerva, she did something very old and very deep, a magic of blood and sacrifice that I have spent 3 years studying and do not fully understand even now. While Harry can call the home where his mother's blood dwells his own, while he lives beneath the roof of his mother's sister, he is protected by that sacrifice in a way no ward I could build would equal. There are those who did not die at Godric's Hollow. There are those who are merely waiting. The day will come when Harry Potter must be ready for what waits, and on that day the protection of his mother's blood may be the only thing that stands between him and an ending. I did not place him with the Dursleys because I thought they would love him. I placed him there because I thought they would keep him alive. I am not a sentimental man. I have buried too many of the people I love to have kept the habit. It was, Minerva thought, beautifully done. His reasons, as the goblin had warned, and weight, and the great good name, and underneath it all the unspoken suggestion that she was a kind and simple woman who had let her heart run away with her, and that the wise and grieving man across the table carried burdens she could not be expected to understand. She let it settle. She drank her tea. Then she set the cup down and she answered him, and her voice did not rise because she had learned long ago that the voice that wins is never the louder one. Lily Potter, she said, lodged a will with Gringotts in the October before she died. A goblin-witnessed will, Albus, the kind that cannot be forged nor altered nor set aside by any power of wizards. In it she named the guardians of her son in order against the day she could not raise him, and at the bottom in her own hand she wrote that under no circumstances was that child to be given to her sister, who does not love what she does not understand. Her words, her hand, witnessed and sealed. The kitchen had gone very still. Dumbledore's face had not changed, and the not changing was the loudest thing in the room. You knew that, Minerva went on, because you sealed it. On the 2nd of November, the day after you laid him on that doorstep. You sealed the one document in Britain that would have told the world she forbade exactly the thing you were about to do, and you sealed it as chief warlock in the interest of public order, and then you went home. And for 3 years you sent gold from that child's own trust to the people his mother named as the last on earth fit to keep him, gold for his keep that never bought him so much as a winter coat, and you never once, Albus, in 3 years, sent a single nut to a healer to mend the arm she would have wept to see. I have the bank's ledgers. I have a goblin who has done the sums. And as of 3 days ago I have petitioned the bank to test whether the emergency that justified your seal still holds, 3 years after you yourself proclaimed the war won and the danger past. She leaned forward just slightly into the lamplight. You cannot have it both ways, Albus. Either the war is over, as you have told the whole of Britain it is, and there is no emergency and your seal must break. Or the war is not over and you have spent 3 years lying to the country from the steps of the ministry. Choose. I should be fascinated to hear which. Now the warmth went out of his face, and what was left was the thing she had come to think of as the true Albus, the one beneath the twinkle, old and tired and terribly certain. You are playing with forces you do not understand, he said quietly to win a point. The child's safety is not a point, Minerva. No, she agreed, it is not. It is the only thing in this that I care for, and it is the thing you traded for a strategy. Do not speak to me of his safety. I have washed his scars. You have not seen them. You arranged 3 years ago never to have to. She rose and gathered the cups, and the gathering was a dismissal as plain as any door. You may fight the petition. You will lose it because the law is the law even for you, and because a goblin who has been offended is a patient and a thorough enemy, and you have offended one. Or you may let it pass and unseal what should never have been sealed, and let a dead woman's wishes be honored at last, and keep what is left of your good name intact for the wars you say are coming. I should think a man as fond of the long view as yourself would see the wisdom in the second course. You are forever telling the rest of us to take the long view. Take it now. He stood. At the door he paused, his hand on the latch, and for a moment the performance fell away entirely, and he looked at her with something that might, in a lesser man, have been pleading. He will need me, Minerva, before the end. Whatever you think of how I have kept him, he will need what I know, and I will need him to trust me when that day comes. Do not raise him to hate me, for his sake, not mine. I am not raising him to hate anyone, she said. I am raising him to think and to ask the question under the question, and to know the difference between people who love him and people who have plans for him. What he makes of you when he is grown will be his to decide, on the evidence which is more than you ever gave his mother's wishes. She opened the door for him onto the grey and the wind. I will not lie to him about you, Albus. That is the most mercy you will get from this house. I do not lie to him about anything. Good evening. He went down toward the loch as he had come, blue against the failing light, and he stopped once more at the rowan tree, and laid his hand against the bark for a moment as though asking it something, and then walked on into the dark and was gone. Minerva stood in the doorway until the cold drove her in. She closed the door. She leaned her back against it. She permitted herself, for the length of 3 breaths, to feel the full weight of what she had set in motion, the enemy she had made, the years of it that surely lay ahead. Then she pushed the weight back down where it would keep, and called up the stair in the ordinary voice of an ordinary house. Harry, you may come down now. He's gone. He came down quick, the sergeant in his fist, and he crossed the kitchen and stopped in front of her and looked up, searching her face for the storm he had braced for, and not finding it, only weariness and a steadiness underneath the weariness that he had come to depend on the way a boat depends on its keel. The old man with the beard, he said. He's the one who put me there in the cupboard. She had promised never to lie to him. He is the one who decided you would live there, yes, she said. He had reasons. He thought they were good ones. I think they were not. People can do a great wrong for what they believe is a great reason, Lenin, and it is still a wrong, and you are allowed to know that it was. Harry thought about this. He thought about it as he thought about the matchstick, completely going still with it. And then he did something he had not done before. He set the sergeant down on the table, carefully, square against the salt. And he reached up and took her cold hand in both of his warm ones, the reverse of the first night, the child comforting now, and he frowned at the hearth where the fire had guttered low and gray while she stood at the door letting the cold in. You're cold, he said. I want to make it warm, for you. Harry, don't help, he said with the absolute seriousness of a 4-year-old issuing an order to an adult. I want to do it, look at it the right way like the herons, and he looked at the fire. He looked at it as she had taught him to look at the matchstick, not waiting for it to feed him but meaning to know it, his whole self gone narrow and bright and pointed at the grey coals. And Minerva McGonagall felt the air of her mother's kitchen draw tight the way it does just before lightning, and the hair rose on her arms, and into the hearth went something that came up out of a child who wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything that was for himself, to give an old tired woman a warm room. The fire leapt, not a flicker, a great gold blossom of flame that climbed the chimney and threw the whole kitchen into dancing light and heat, and Harry sat back on his heels with his eyes enormous and his mouth open, looking from the fire to his own 2 hands and back, and the sergeant fell over with the force of the draught, and somewhere outside a startled heron clattered up off the dark water. For a long moment neither of them said anything at all. "There now," said Minerva McGonagall, and her voice was not quite steady, and for once in her life she did not trouble to steady it. She knelt down on the hearthrug in the roaring gold light and gathered the child against her and held him while he shook with the wonder of it, this thing that had come up out of him on its own grey wings because the water had finally gone calm enough to fish. "There now, there you are, oh Lenin, there you are." Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Intention then attention. 2 years on, the matchstick still would not become a needle, and it was driving Harry Potter to distraction. He was 6 now, going on 7, and he had grown into the house the way the Rowan had grown into the hill, until it seemed he had always been there and the place had merely been waiting to admit it. He was no longer small for his age. He was lean and quick and brown from a summer spent half in the loch, and the watchfulness that had once been the whole of him had folded down into something subtler, a habit of noticing rather than a posture of fear. He still kept the sergeant. He no longer kept bread behind the books. Minerva had found the last hidden crust the previous spring, gone to dust in the pocket of a coat he had outgrown, and she had stood in his room holding it for a while, and then she had thrown it out for the birds and said nothing, because some victories are spoiled by being named. What had not changed was the matchstick. It sat on the kitchen table in the morning light, ordinary and infuriating, and Harry sat across from it with his elbows on the wood and his chin in his hands and his whole considerable will pointed at it like a hound at a hole. "You are frowning at it," Minerva observed from the range, not turning round. "Frowning is not a spell. It works for you. I am not frowning, I am attending. There is a difference, and until you learn it you will glare at that matchstick until you are 40. She brought her tea to the table and sat, milk-glassed, and considered him over the rim of the cup. "Show me." He showed her. He fixed the matchstick with a look that would have curdled milk, and he reached for the place inside himself where the magic lived, the place he had first found in the roaring of the fire, and he pulled. The matchstick shivered. It went silver at one end briefly, beautifully, a flush of metal running a third of the way down the wood, and then the whole thing burst into flame and burned to a curl of ash on the scrubbed pine. "Ah," said Minerva, "it always does that." Harry put his face down on the table beside the ash. "It goes silver and then it gets cross and burns up. Why does it burn up? Because you are giving it everything you have," she said, "and a needle does not want everything you have. A needle wants exactly enough and not a grain more. You have a great deal of power, Harry, more than is decent in a child your age, and power is the easy part. Everyone is so impressed by power. Power is the least of it." She swept the ash into her palm and tipped it into the fire. "What you have not got yet is restraint. The matchstick does not need to be conquered. It needs to be persuaded that it was always, secretly, a needle, and would much prefer to go back to being one. You cannot bully a thing into remembering itself. You have to want the change more precisely than you want it loudly." "Intention then attention," Harry recited. He had heard it 1,000 times. He believed it the way one believes a thing one has been told and not yet learned. "Intention," Minerva agreed, "is knowing exactly what you mean to make, not a needle in general, this needle. Its length, its weight, the eye at the top, the point at the bottom, the cold particular silver of it, held so clear in your mind that the matchstick has no room left to be anything else. That is intention. And attention is holding that picture without strain, without shoving, the way you hold a bird that has landed on your hand, firmly enough that it cannot leave and gently enough that it does not wish to." She set a fresh matchstick before him. "You light fires because fire is easy and large and forgiving, and you are 6. Transfiguration is the discipline of the exact. It will be the making of you if you let it, because it will teach you the thing that frightened children are slowest to learn, which is that you need not spend all of your strength to be strong. Again, and this time do not pull, ask." He tried again. He did not get the needle. But the silver ran half the length of the wood before it failed, and it did not burn, and Minerva said "better," and meant it, and Harry carried the word around with him all morning as he had once carried hidden bread. The years had taught the house a rhythm, and the rhythm was the truest thing about it. In the mornings there were lessons, the deliberate kind, at the kitchen table. Letters that had long since become reading, reading that had become a hunger Minerva fed from her own shelves and from parcels she ordered by owl, the great cracked atlas, the names of stars, sums that grew teeth as the months went by. Harry took to all of it the way a dry field takes rain, greedily, and asked the question under the question, until Minerva had to send him to the dictionary to look up half his own queries, which she suspected was the real lesson and never admitted. In the afternoons there was the loch. He had learned to swim in it the first summer, shrieking at the cold, and to row the little boat the second, and to lie flat on the warm stones of the bank and watch the herons fish until he could predict, to the second, the moment the general would miss. He named the trout. He fell in regularly. He came home soaked and starving and full of news, and Minerva would hear the whole of it, every minnow and every cloud, because she had decided that a child who has spent 3 years with no one to tell things to is owed a listener for the rest of his life, and she meant to be one. He had friends of a sort in the wizarding hamlet down the glen, where a handful of old families kept to themselves, and were neither impressed nor frightened by a Potter because they had known Potters and McGonagalls both for 200 years, and judged a child on whether he could skim a stone. He could skim a stone. He had got a black eye once in a dispute over the rules of a game and given a better one in return, and Minerva had healed them both and lectured them both and privately been rather pleased, because a child who fights his own corner is a child who has decided he is worth a corner, and that was a thing the cupboard had nearly taken from him and had not, in the end, managed. And in the evenings there was the fire and the reading aloud and the talk and the unspectacular rituals that are the real architecture of a life. The milk went in last, the sergeant kept the salt, the herons were saluted at breakfast and bidden good night at dusk. On Sundays there was the matchstick, and the grimoire Minerva had not yet shown him, and a long walk up the hill behind the house from which on a clear day you could see 4 locks and the smoke of the hamlet and the whole green sweep of the world that had become, without anyone declaring it his. He was happy. He did not know to be surprised by it, which was the surest sign of how far he had come, because a child who must remark upon his own happiness is a child who does not yet trust it to stay. The owl from Gringotts came in the 2nd week of that September, and it was not a letter but a parcel, flat and heavy and sealed in goblin wax, and inside it was a single sheet of parchment and a brass key, and Minerva read the parchment standing at the window and then read it again sitting down. The bank had tested the sealing of the Potter will as it had promised in a quiet proceeding to which the chief warlock had been formally summoned. He had not contested it. That was the part that told her the most. He had sent a short letter conceding that the emergency which justified the seal had passed, and consenting to the will's execution and saying nothing else at all, which from Albus Dumbledore was a roar. He had chosen the long view as she had advised him to. He had decided that the cost of being seen to fight a dead mother's wishes was higher than the cost of losing this round. She did not flatter herself it was the end of anything. It was the end of the beginning, which was a different and smaller thing, and she would take it. The will was executed. The 3rd provision stood. Minerva McGonagall and Poppy Pomfrey were, in the eyes of the bank and the law, the guardians Lily Potter had chosen, 2 years late and against a great man's preference, but chosen all the same. The cottage in the west passed to Harry's keeping. And with the cottage, the parchment noted in Gornuk's dry, precise hand, came its keeper, who had been informed of the change in her circumstances and had received the news. The goblin wrote, with a degree of feeling that Gringotts was neither equipped nor inclined to manage. And would the new guardian please make arrangements at her earliest convenience to take delivery of one house elf, before the said elf wore a hole in the floor of the bank's waiting hall with her pacing. Tilly arrived the following afternoon, by means no one ever fully established, on the doorstep beneath the rowan tree, and she was the smallest person Harry had ever seen and the most fierce. She came up to his waist. She was wrapped in a clean linen pillow slip stitched at the shoulders, and she had ears like a startled bat and eyes like wet brown glass, and she carried, clutched to her chest with both spidery hands, a wooden box nearly as big as she was. She stood on the doorstep and looked up at Harry, and her enormous eyes went over his face feature by feature, his black hair and his green eyes and the thin line on his brow, and her whole body began to tremble. "Master Harry," she whispered. "Oh, Master Harry, you has Master James's hair. You has Mistress Lily's eyes. Tilly knew you would. Tilly told the goblins you would, and the goblins said it was not their concern, the cold, horrid creatures, but Tilly knew." And then she burst into tears, great gulping, noiseless sobs, and pressed her face against the doorframe, and would not be comforted for several minutes, and Harry stood over her with his hands hovering helpless, looking back at Minerva for instruction. Minerva crouched to the elf's level as she had once crouched to a child's. "You are Tilly," she said gently. "You kept the Potter's cottage 7 years alone against their coming home. Tilly kept it good," the elf wept. Tilly kept the brass shining and the gardens neat and Master James's room just so, with his Quidditch things and his broom oiled in case they came back. Tilly knew they was not coming back. Tilly is not stupid, whatever the goblins say. But a Potter house must be kept, mistress. It must be kept ready, and there was no one to keep it but Tilly, and so Tilly kept it. She lifted her streaming face. "And now there is a Potter again. There is a Potter again, and he is thin, and someone has not been feeding him right." Her voice rose to a register of pure outrage. "Who has not been feeding Master Harry right? Tilly will have words. Tilly will have very serious words." "He is being fed right now," Minerva said, with the ghost of something at the corner of her mouth, "and the someone who is not is no longer our concern. Come in out of the cold, Tilly. There is a great deal to discuss, and I will tell you now, before you cross my threshold, the terms on which you will live under my roof, because I keep no slaves and I'll not start at my age." The negotiation that followed was the strangest Harry had ever witnessed, and he never forgot it. Minerva sat the elf at the kitchen table, which scandalized Tilly nearly into a faint, and laid out her terms as though to a colleague. That Tilly was free and could not be made unfree, and that her bond would be to Harry's well-being and not his commands, that she would be paid, which made Tilly wail and cover her ears, that she would take 1 day in 7 to herself and would be sent to bed if she worked through it. And that under no circumstances, none, was she ever to punish herself, to strike herself, to shut her hand in a drawer or her fingers in a door, for any failure real or imagined, because there had been quite enough of people hurting themselves to please others in this house already, and Minerva would not have one more. Tilly agreed to everything except the wages, over which she held out for an hour, and they compromised at last on a sum so small it was clearly symbolic, and a promise that the rest would be set aside in an account in Tilly's own name, which Tilly accepted only on the understanding that she would never, ever touch it, and that it was a terrible imposition, and that Mistress Minerva was the maddest and kindest witch in all of Scotland, and that Tilly would die for any of them without a moment's notice, and was offended not to have been asked already. "Nobody," said Minerva, "is dying for anybody in this house. We have a strict policy. Now, what is in the box?" But Tilly was not done, because the sight of Harry had loosed 7 years of damned devotion, and it came out of her in a flood while the kettle heated. Master James, she told them, had been the worst boy and the best man, had once turned every teacup in the cottage into a mouse to make his mother laugh on a bad morning, and had been unable to turn a single one back, and had had to confess it, scarlet-eared, at the age of 19. Mistress Lily had taught Tilly to read in secret against every custom, sitting on the kitchen floor with a primer between them, because Mistress Lily said a mind was a mind whatever ears it came with. They had been so loud and so kind and so certain the war would not touch them, and they had been wrong, and Tilly had kept their brass shining anyway, because shining brass was the one true thing a heartbroken elf could still do for the people she had loved. Harry listened to all of it with his chin on his fists and his eyes very bright, hoarding it, as he had once hoarded crusts, except that this was a hunger no one would ever need to cure. The box held the Potters. Tilly opened it on the kitchen table with the reverence of a priest at an altar, and out of it came the things she had saved from the ruin of Godric's Hollow before the ministry sealed it, the things a Potter elf had judged worth keeping when the world ended. There was a photograph in a tarnished silver frame, and in it a young man with Harry's unruly black hair and laughing eyes had his arm round a young woman with Harry's exact green ones, and they moved the way wizarding photographs move, his father saying something to make her laugh and his mother laughing and swatting his arm, and the two of them turning to look out of the frame, straight at Harry, and waving. There was a battered practice snitch. There was a christening blanket worked with stags and lilies. There was a man's watch and a woman's ring and a child's first drawing, a scribble of green and black that Tilly swore was a portrait of the family done by Master Harry himself at the age of 1, and which Harry studied for a long time without saying anything at all. He picked up the photograph last. He held it in both hands as he had once held the sergeant, as though it were spun glass, and he watched his mother laugh and swat his father's arm over and over, the little loop of a moment that had outlived them both. "Tell me about them," he said. He did not look up. "Please, I want to know everything. I want to know it all the way down." Minerva sent Tilly to put the kettle on, which gave the elf something to do with her grief, and she drew her chair round beside Harry's, and she told him. She told him truly, because she had promised she would, and because she had decided long ago that the comfortable lie was a poorer gift than the difficult truth offered by someone who would sit with you while it landed. She told him his father, James Potter, had been a horror and a delight, a boy of enormous talent and enormous arrogance who had spent his first years at Hogwarts being insufferable, and his last years learning not to be, who had loved his friends past sense and his wife past reason, and who had grown in the end into a brave and decent man who would not have hidden behind anyone. She told him his mother, Lily, had been the cleverest student Minerva ever taught, kind in the fierce way that has nothing soft about it, the sort of person who befriended the friendless and fought the cruel, and was gentle with everyone except those who had earned otherwise. She told him they had married young because there was a war on and young people in wars do not wait. She told him they had loved him so much the whole of Hogwarts had heard about it, that James had handed round photographs in the staff room until the staff hid when they saw him coming, that Lily had written to Minerva when Harry was born a letter so full of joy it had 3 exclamation marks in the first line, and that she had kept it and would show it to him one day. And then, because he had asked to know it all the way down, and because he was watching her with his mother's eyes, she told him the rest. She told him there had been a dark wizard, the worst the country had ever produced, who had wanted to rule by fear and who had killed a great many people, and who had, for reasons still not wholly understood, come to want Harry's family dead most of all. She told him that James and Lily had gone into hiding to protect him, and that they had been betrayed by someone they trusted, and that the dark wizard had come for them on a night at the end of October, when Harry was 1 year and 3 months old. She told him that James had died first at the foot of the stairs with no wand in his hand, buying his family the seconds it took Lily to reach the nursery. She told him that Lily had stood between the dark wizard and Harry's cot and refused to step aside, though she was offered her life if she would, again and again, and that she had chosen instead to die with her arms around her son. And then Minerva said, and here her voice, which had held steady through all of it, went thin, "He turned his wand on you, a baby in a cot, and something happened no one has ever been able to explain. The curse that had killed 100 grown wizards struck you, and it did not kill you. It left you that mark on your brow and nothing worse, and it destroyed him instead, or destroyed enough of him that he has not been seen since. Your mother's death stood between you and the worst magic in the world, Harry, and the worst magic in the world lost. That is who they were. That is what they did. They were not perfect people. They were brave ones, and they were yours, and they would be so proud of you that they would be perfectly unbearable about it, and I am only sorry you have to take my word for it instead of theirs." Harry was quiet for a long time. The kettle sang until he took it off, and the kitchen smelled of tea, and the photograph turned its loop in his hands. "The mark," he said finally. He touched the line on his brow, as he did sometimes without knowing he was doing it. "From the curse, that's why it's there. That is why it is there. Does it mean something? People act like it means something." He had been to the hamlet twice, to the wizarding quarter of the city once with Minerva, and both times there had been the staring, the whispering, the way grown strangers' eyes went to his forehead and then went strange. "When we went to Diagon Alley, that wizard dropped his parcels, just from looking at me." Why? This was the question under the question, and Minerva did not flinch from it, but she chose her ground with care because he was 6, and some doors are better opened a little at a time. "Because the night your mother died and the dark wizard fell," she said. "The whole of our world had been living in terror for 11 years, and it ended, as far as anyone could see, in your nursery with you. So they made you into a story. The boy who lived, they call you, which is a foolish name because every living person is a child who lived, but people who have been frightened for a long time need somewhere to put their relief, and they put it on you. It is not fair. You did nothing but survive your mother's love. But it is true, and you asked for the truth, and there it is." She took the photograph gently from his hands and set it upright on the dresser where his parents could watch the room. "There is more to it than that, I think. There are things even I do not know, and things others know and have not said. When you are older, we will dig them up together, every one, and look at them in good light. But you have had enough truth for one afternoon, and your mother is laughing on the dresser, and Tilly has made far too much tea. Come and drink it. The dead are best honored by the living getting on with living. They would tell you so themselves if they could, especially your father. He was famously bad at sitting still." That night Harry asked, very casually, in the careful voice he used for the things that mattered most, whether the photograph might come and live on the shelf by his bed instead of the dresser, just for a while, just so he could see them when he woke. Minerva said it might, and carried it up herself, and set it where the morning light off the lock would find it first, and did not stay to see him fall asleep watching his parents wave, because some things a person should be allowed to do alone. He asked a fortnight later to see the cottage. He asked as he asked the things that frightened him, sideways over breakfast, watching the herons rather than her face. The house Tilly had kept, his family's house. He wanted, he said, to stand in a room his father had stood in. Minerva considered it over her tea, and decided the request was a healthy one, the reaching of a child for solid ground beneath a story, and that she would rather be beside him the first time he stood on it than have him reach for it alone at 17. So on the Saturday they went, the three of them, by a portkey the goblins arranged, an old brass doorknob that hooked them behind the navel, and set them down in a walled garden on the far western coast where the light came off the sea instead of the loch. The cottage was low and white and thick-walled against the Atlantic weather, and it was not the ruin of Godric's Hollow, which Harry had half expected and dreaded. It was the older Potter house, the one James had grown up in, where Fleamont and Euphemia had raised their late and only son and spoiled him outrageously. And it was kept. That was the thing that undid Harry before he had crossed the threshold. The brass of the door knocker shone. The garden was clipped and the roses dead-headed and the path swept, all of it tended for 7 years by one small elf for the sake of people who would never see it, and the keeping of it said, more plainly than any photograph, that this family had been loved and was missed and had not been allowed to fade. Tilly led them through it like a curator who had waited her whole life for visitors. Here was the kitchen where Mistress Lily had sat on the floor teaching an elf to read. Here was the parlor, the good chairs under dust sheets that Tilly whipped away with a snap of her fingers, the cabinet of Euphemia Potter's potion trophies, for she had been a noted brewer, and the family fortune had been founded on a hair potion of her husband's invention, which made Harry laugh in startled delight that he came from people who had grown rich on the taming of unruly hair, he who had never once tamed his own. And here up the narrow stair at the end of the landing was a door Tilly opened with particular care. James Potter's room. It was a boy's room, frozen at 17. There were Quidditch pennants on the walls, gone soft with age but not with neglect, and a shelf of trophies, and a desk scarred with penknife initials, and a broom mounted on 2 brackets, oiled and gleaming, that Tilly dusted weekly. There were photographs stuck round the mirror, 4 laughing boys with their arms across one another's shoulders, and Harry stood in the doorway and looked at his father at his own future age, loud and bright and certain the world would never touch him. And he did not cry, but he went into the room very slowly, the way one enters a church, and he put his hand flat on the desk where his father's hand had rested, and he stood there a long time with the sea light moving on the wall. He was real, Harry said at last to no one. He was a real person who lived in a real room and carved his name in a real desk. He traced the penknife letters with one finger, J.P. dug deep by a bored boy in a lesson half a century gone. I knew he was, but I didn't know it all the way down. Now I know it all the way down. That, said Minerva quietly from the doorway, is exactly why we came. She did not go in. It was his room to stand in, not hers. We will keep it, Harry, all of it exactly as it is, for as long as you want it kept. Tilly will go on shining the brass because it pleases her and it honors them. And when you are a man, you will decide what this house is to become, a home or a memory or both, and whatever you decide will be right, because it will be a Potter deciding for the Potters at last, and not a sealed envelope in a goblin's drawer. She let him have the silence a moment more. Take something, if you like, something of his to carry. He would want you to. He was a great one for handing his things round. Harry chose the broom, not to fly, not yet, but to mount on his own wall above his own bed beside the photograph, so that his father's room and his own would have a thing in common across all the miles and years between them. Tilly wept, of course, and was so proud she could barely speak, and they took it home through the brass doorknob with the broom held carefully across Harry's knees. And that night the cottage on the western coast had, for the first time in 7 years, the satisfaction of having been visited by someone who belonged to it. Poppy came in October for what had become her seasonal habit to look Harry over and pronounce upon him, and what she pronounced, that year, sitting back from her examination with her wand still warm in her hand, was the thing Minerva had waited 3 years to hear. "Mended," Poppy said. "All the way through, near enough. The arms straight, the weight's right, he's the height he ought to be and gaining. He sleeps, he eats like a Hungarian horntail." He argued with me for 10 minutes about whether a strengthening solution counts as cheating at chess, which is the healthiest thing I have heard out of a child this year. She packed her bag. "You did that, Minerva, not me, not the potions. You 3 years of being there in the morning. It is the dullest medicine in the world and the only one that ever truly works." She paused at the door and her brisk face softened. "Lily would know him anywhere. That is the thing I keep thinking. She would walk in that door and know her boy in a heartbeat, and she would know you raised him, and she would weep, Minerva, the good kind. Hold on to that the next time the great men come knocking." The ministry man came the following week, and Minerva had been expecting him too, in his way. He arrived by the proper road, on foot from the hamlet, in robes a careful shade of bureaucratic gray, and he introduced himself on the doorstep as a Mr. Pertwee of the Office for the Welfare of Magical Minors, and he produced a great many papers, and he was, Minerva understood within a minute, neither cruel nor stupid, but a functionary doing a thing he had been sent to do by someone who had not put his own name to the sending. There had been, Mr. Pertwee explained, apologetic, a concern raised, the placement of a notable orphan, questions of suitability. The office was obliged to inquire, purely routine. "Of course," said Minerva, and showed him in and sat him down and gave him tea milk-last, and then she dismantled the inquiry so thoroughly and so courteously that Mr. Pertwee was almost grateful by the end. She produced the executed will, goblin-sealed, naming her guardian. She produced the bank's finding that the prior placement had been improper. She produced Poppy Pomfrey's healer's testimony, 3 years of it, documenting the state in which Harry had been recovered and the state he was in now. She produced last Harry himself, who came in from the garden brown and grinning with a frog in his cupped hands to ask whether he might keep it, and who said please and thank you and good afternoon to the strange grey wizard and offered to show him the herons, and who was visibly a child who was loved and fed and unafraid, which was an argument no parchment could match. "I am obliged to ask," said Mr. Pertwee, gathering his papers, not meeting her eye. "The source of the original concern is highly placed. He has expressed a continued interest in the child's development. I am to ask whether you would consent to a, shall we say, supervisory arrangement, regular contact, reports." "You may tell the highly placed person," Minerva said pleasantly, walking him to the door, "that the child's development is proceeding admirably, that he is welcome to inquire after it through the front door like a Christian whenever he likes, and that there will be no reports, no supervision, and no arrangements, because Lily Potter did not name him in her will, and I will not have her wishes set aside a second time by the same hand. Write that down, Mr. Pertwee, word for word. I should like it on the record. I am building rather a lot of record these days." She held the door. "The frog may stay, Harry, in the garden, not the house. Good afternoon, Mr. Pertwee. Mind the loose stone on the path." She watched the grey man pick his way down toward the hamlet, and she stood in the doorway longer than the cold warranted, because she knew, the way a sailor knows weather, that the inquiry had not been meant to succeed. It had been meant to remind her that she could be inquired into. It was the gentlest possible knock on the door, a great man clearing his throat in the next room so that she would not forget he was in the house. She found she was not frightened by it, which surprised her and then did not surprise her, because fear is a thing you feel for what you might lose, and she had stopped, somewhere in these 3 years, thinking of Harry as a thing she might lose and started thinking of him as a thing she would defend, and the two postures live in entirely different parts of a person. That evening when the supper was cleared and Tilly had been persuaded to sit by the fire with her impossible knitting instead of scrubbing a clean floor, Minerva took down from the highest shelf a thing Harry had never seen her touch. It was a book, very old, bound in black hide gone soft with handling, and on its cover was tooled a crest he did not know, a tower and a thistle and a single star. She set it on the table between them with the same ceremony Tilly had used for the box of the Potters, and she laid her hand flat upon it for a moment before she opened it. "This is the McGonagall grimoire," she said, "the transfiguration of my mother's people, written down and added to for 9 generations. The towers I told you about, the ones people built and knocked down. Good few of them are in here, in the hands of the women who built them, my grandmother and her grandmother, and back into the dark. I have added to it myself. One day, if I have done my work, you will add to it too." She turned it to face him. "I have no children of my body, Harry. I'll not pretend that does not sit oddly in me some nights that I am giving a Potter the work of the McGonagalls, but blood is the least of what a family is. I have decided, if you are willing, to make you my heir. Not in place of your own people, alongside them. You will have what is theirs, which is yours by right and which I have kept safe for you. And you will have what is mine, which I give you by choice, which is the older gift of the two and the one I am prouder of, this house, these hills, this book, my name beside your own if you want it, the way two people who choose each other take each other's names. You need not answer tonight, you are 7 in a fortnight." It is a great deal to put on a person who is 7 in a fortnight. Harry looked at the book, and at the crest, and at the photograph on the dresser where Minerva had set it back for the evening so his parents could be part of the room, and at the fierce small elf knitting by the fire who had kept a dead family's brass shining for 7 years against all hope, and at the tall, stern woman across the table who had come for him in the dark and made the porridge every morning since. "Harry James Potter," he said slowly, trying the shape of it, and then carefully, the way one tries a step in the dark with one's foot. "Harry James Potter McGonagall. It is a mouthful," Minerva admitted. "I like a mouthful." He put his hand flat on the grimoire next to hers, the same gesture learned in a heartbeat. "Yes, I want it. I want all of it, theirs and yours." He frowned, the question already rising because it always did. Will the old man with the beard be cross? "That you made me yours, almost certainly," said Minerva. "I find I have stopped weighing my decisions by whether they will please Albus Dumbledore, and I recommend the practice. It is enormously freeing. Now," she slid a fresh matchstick across the table into the lamplight between them. "You have had a large day, and large days are the best days for difficult magic, because the difficult magic comes easier when the heart is full and quiet at the same time. Try the needle, not to please me. Not to prove anything, try it because your mother was the cleverest witch I ever taught, and it would be a pity to let her down on the easy spells." She sat back, intention, then attention, and Harry Potter McGonagall, 7 in a fortnight, heir to 2 houses and a box full of laughing ghosts, looked at the matchstick. He did not glare at it, he did not pull. He thought of his mother on the dresser, laughing, and his father with no wand in his hand at the foot of the stairs, and the whole full quiet weight of the day, and he let all of it gather and go still, and then he held in his mind one needle, this needle, its length and its weight, and the eye at the top and the cold particular silver of it, and he did not ask the matchstick to obey him. He asked it gently, firmly, to remember that it had always, secretly, wished to be a needle, and would much prefer to go back. The matchstick did not catch fire. It lay on the table in the lamplight, and the silver came up out of one end and ran the length of it, slow and certain, complete, the wood thinning and brightening and hardening as it went, and where a matchstick had been there lay a needle, gleaming, with a true point and a clean eye, a thing exactly enough and not a grain more. Tilly's knitting fell into the fire. Minerva McGonagall looked at the needle on her mother's table for a long moment, and then she looked at the child who had made it, who was staring at his own work with his mouth open and his mother's eyes enormous and bright, and she reached out and picked the needle up and turned it in the lamplight and felt the true cold weight of it, the finished particular fact of it. "There," she said, and her voice was steady because she chose to keep it so, but only just, "there now. Oh, Lenin, your mother would be perfectly unbearable." She set the needle down in the center of the table, where the sergeant could guard it and where it would stay for years, the first true thing he had ever made, and she put the kettle back on though no one wanted tea, because the rituals are how a family marks that something has changed and cannot be unchanged, and something had. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Gringotts. The first thing Harry learned about Diagon Alley at 8 years old was that it had decided opinions about him before he had said a word. They came in through the back of the leaky cauldron, where Minerva tapped the bricks in their old sequence, and the wall folded itself open onto the crooked sunlit street, and for the length of a breath Harry simply stood in the gap and looked. He had read about it. He had been told about it. He had even passed through it twice as a small child, holding Minerva's hand and keeping his eyes down. None of that was the same as standing in the mouth of it at 8, tall enough now to see over the crowd, and letting the whole bright, impossible length of it pour into him at once. The cauldrons stacked in pyramids, the apothecaries reek of brimstone and dried newt, the owls grumbling in their cages, the broomsticks roped off behind glass with knots of boys pressed to the window, the gold letters and the moving signs, and the witches in robes the colors of stained glass haggling over the price of dragon liver 3 feet from a man selling self-stirring cauldrons at the top of his lungs. "Breathe," said Minerva beside him, dry as ever. "It is only a street. It has been here 1,000 years and will wait while you find your feet." "It's brilliant," Harry said, which was inadequate, and they both knew it, and she let it stand. He could not take it in fast enough. There was a shop entirely of cauldrons and a shop entirely of quills and a shop where the window showed a fountain of bubbling pink liquid that turned out on inspection to be ink. There was an old wizard arguing with a portrait about the price the portrait had paid for itself. There was a witch leading a string of children younger than Harry, each clutching the robe hem of the one in front like ducklings. And at the corner where the street bent, there was a window with a single broomstick mounted on a velvet stand, gleaming and tapered, a placard beneath it announcing it the very newest racing model, and a crowd of boys 3 deep with their noses to the glass and their breath fogging it. Harry slowed. He did not press to the window. He looked at the broom from where he stood, and Minerva watched him do it, and watched the thing she was learning to read in him, the going still that meant a thought had hooked him. "My dad had a broom," he said. "It's on my wall." He did. He was reckoned the best flyer of his year, which he never let anyone forget, the dreadful boy. You may have one of your own in time when you are old enough to break your neck on it more gracefully. That one in the window is all show and no balance between us. Your father would have laughed at it. He flew an older model on purpose because the old ones turned tighter, and he liked turning tighter than was wise. We will find you a good honest broom one day, not a fashionable one. The Potters were never a fashionable family. They were a good one. Harry stored that with all the rest of the small true things she gave him about his father, the broom and the turning tighter, the way you might add a coin to a hoard you mean to keep your whole life. Halfway up the street stood a shop he could have lived in. Flourish and blots, the gold letters said, and the windows were stacked floor to ceiling with books, fat and thin, chained and free, one of them snapping at a browsing customer's fingers and another humming faintly to itself on a high shelf. Harry stopped dead. He had been reading Minerva out of house and shelf for 3 years, working steadily up toward the fat green book she had promised him at 6, and the sight of an entire building made of the things rooted him to the cobbles. "Yes," said Minerva, watching his face, "I thought that might happen. We are not buying books today. Today is a business day, and a person who lets himself into a bookshop on a business day comes out at dusk with empty pockets and a sore back and no business done. But mark the place. When your Hogwarts letter comes, and it will, we will spend an entire wicked afternoon in there, and I will let you buy 3 more books than your list requires, which is the correct number of extra books, being precisely as many as one can carry without help." She steered him on gently while he craned back over his shoulder. "Books will keep. They are the most patient things in the world. It is one of the chief arguments in their favor." The second thing he learned was the staring. It started before they had passed the bookshop. A witch with a basket of leeks looked at him, and then looked again, and then looked at his forehead, and her face did the strange thing he remembered from years ago, the thing the stranger who had dropped his parcels had done, a sort of stricken brightening, as though she had seen something holy and slightly alarming. She nudged her companion. The companion looked. By the time they reached the cool shadow of the apothecaries awning, a small wake of whispers was following them down the street, and Harry could hear his own name in it, passed hand to hand like a coin. "Potter, that's Potter, the boy. Who is it? It must be." Look at the he had thought, when Minerva first explained it to him at 6, that he understood. He found at 8 that understanding a thing and standing in the middle of it were different countries. His shoulders wanted to climb. The old watchfulness, the cataloguing of exits, came up in him like a tide he had not felt in years. Minerva did not slow her pace, and she did not lower her voice, and she did not pretend the staring was not happening, because she did not lie to him, not even by omission. "They are not looking at you," she said, conversational, steering him by the shoulder past a cart of bat spleens. "Mark that, it is important. They are looking at a story they have carried about in their heads for 7 years, and they have hung your face on it because they have no other face to use. The story is theirs, the face is yours. Do not let them confuse you about which is which." She paused at a crossing to let a wheelbarrow of squashed-looking pumpkins go by. "You will meet this for the rest of your life in one form or another. You may as well learn the trick of it young. The trick is to be entirely, boringly yourself. A story cannot survive 5 minutes of an ordinary boy asking the price of an ice cream. Stories need distance. Deny them the distance." Harry considered this. He looked at the leek witch, who was still staring, and he did the bravest thing he could think of, which was to meet her eyes and say, clearly, "Good morning." The witch went the color of her own leeks and fled into a shop. Harry felt the tide go out of him a little. There was, he discovered, a kind of power in being a person to someone who wanted you to be a legend, and it was a quieter and better power than the kind that made fires roar, and he tucked the discovery away beside the broom in the bookshop. Better, said Minerva, and there was the word again, the one he had carried around at 6, and he stood a half-inch taller under it. Now, business first, pleasure after, that is the law of any sensible expedition. The bank. Gringotts stood at the end of the street where it always had, white and crooked and towering, its bronze doors flanked by goblins in scarlet and gold, who bowed them in with expressions that promised nothing. Beyond the second doors, the silver ones with the warning graven on them about thieves and what the vaults did to them, the great hall opened up, vast and cold and echoing, 100 goblins at 100 high desks scratching at ledgers under chandeliers that did not flicker. Far off at the hall's edge, a low iron gate stood open on a downward dark where the vault carts ran, and a cold mineral wind came up out of it that smelled of deep stone and old gold. Harry had been small the last time. He had not understood then that the cold was on purpose, that the marble and the height and the unhurried contempt were a language, and the language said, "Here, gold is the only magic that signifies, and you are a guest in a house older than your kind." He understood it now. He found he rather respected it. They did not queue. A goblin in finer dress than the tellers was waiting at the foot of the hall, and he did not bow, and he led them without a word down a side passage, and through a door of black iron Harry recognized from Minerva's descriptions, into a room of green-flamed lamps where an old goblin sat behind a desk with a brass plate that read GORNUK. The old goblin set down his quill with the precision of a man docking a ship, and for a moment he and Harry looked at each other, the very old creature and the 8-year-old, across a desk that had stood between Potters and their gold for longer than either had been alive. "So," said Gornuk, the heir, "I have managed this account for 31 years, young Potter. I have watched it pass from a confident young couple who argued cheerfully about every nut, to a sealed silence, to a great many disbursements I did not care for, to a witch who walked in here 4 years ago and asked me the right question. In all that time I have never once laid eyes on the person the account is for. I confess a certain professional satisfaction in finally doing so. Sit, both of you, we have a great deal of ground to cover and I dislike repeating myself." Harry sat. He put his hands flat on his knees the way Minerva did when she meant to listen properly, and he said, because someone had taught him manners and because he meant it, "Thank you for looking after it," when there was no one to look after it for. Something shifted in the ancient folded face. Goblins do not smile, and Gornuk did not, but he inclined his head a precise half-inch, which Harry would learn was the goblin equivalent of an embrace. "You are welcome," said Gornuk. "It is my work, and I do my work well, and it is a rare wizard who thinks to thank a goblin for it. Your mother did. I find the trait has bred true. Now attend and ask your questions as they come, because a person who hoards his questions to seem clever only seems slow. We begin with what is yours." What was Harry's, it transpired, was a great deal. Gornuk laid it out the way Minerva laid out Transfiguration, in clean exact pieces, building one upon the next. There was the trust vault, opened by his great-grandfather, which would come to Harry's own hand at 11, and held more than enough for any schooling. There was the main vault, deep in the roots of the bank, sealed since his parents' deaths, which held the accumulated wealth of 40 generations of Potters. Gold, yes, but also the family's books, its heirlooms, the deeds to the cottage and the townhouse and the ruin at Godric's Hollow, a set of dueling wands 2 centuries old, a chest of his grandmother Euphemia's prize-winning potions notes, and the patents still earning to the hair potion that had made the family rich. There was income. There were investments his great-grandfather had made in goblin-wrought goods that had quietly multiplied for 100 years. There was, in short, an estate, the kind of old, comfortable fortune that does not shout but does not run out, and it was his, every nut of it, held in trust by the bank against the day he was a man. "I am not telling you this to make you proud," Gornuk said, watching the figures land on the child's face, "nor to make you greedy, both of which are easy and beneath you. I am telling you because gold is power, and a person who does not know the shape of his own power can have it used against him without his knowledge, which is precisely what has been happening to you since you were 15 months old. Knowledge is the first defense. A wizard who does not know what he owns is a wizard who can be told what he owns by whoever owns him. You will never again be that wizard, so you know the shape of it now. Good." He drew a fresh ledger toward him. "Next we come to the part I have been waiting 4 years to put before someone with the standing to act on it, the part that is not gold." "The seat," said Minerva quietly. "The seat," Gornuk agreed. Harry looked between them. "What seat?" Gornuk turned the ledger so that Harry could see, though Harry could make little of the cramped goblin script, and tapped a line near the top with one black nail. "The house of Potter is an old house, young Potter. Not a noble and most ancient house. Your family was never grand in that particular tiresome way, but old and old respected families hold a seat in the Wisengamot. The High Court, the body that makes the law of wizarding Britain and sits in judgment under it. Your father held the Potter seat, his father before him. It is yours by blood the moment you come of age." He let that settle, and then he laid the second fact beside it, flat and cold. "You are 8. You cannot sit in a court of law, and so, under the rules, while the holder of a hereditary seat is a minor, the seat is voted by a proxy, named by the child's magical guardian of record. Your magical guardian of record from the night your parents died until 4 years ago was Albus Dumbledore. He named the proxy. He named himself. The green lamp light hissed quietly in the silence. He's been voting it, Harry said. He had gone very still, the stillness that came before the matchstick, the thinking hard and fast stillness. My family's vote in the court that makes the laws for 7 years. For 7 years, said Gornock, which you will appreciate is a thing a person might find useful if he were a person who liked the laws to come out a particular way. The chief warlock runs the court. The chief warlock who also held the Potter proxy could, on a close question, lean upon the Potter vote as though it were his own, and call it the will of an ancient house, and no one the wiser because the house in question was a baby in Surrey who could not read. He closed the ledger. I make no accusation as to how he voted. I am a banker, not a magistrate. I observe only that he held a vote that was not his for 7 years, granted to him by a guardianship he secured by sealing the will that would have given the child to others. The same hand, young Potter, you are beginning to see the shape of the same hand. Harry saw it as he had seen the silver run down the matchstick, all at once and along its whole length. He didn't put me with the Dursleys only to keep me safe, he said slowly. He put me somewhere I'd be small and quiet and grateful and his, somewhere I'd never learn I had a vote or gold or a name that meant something, somewhere I'd grow up needing him to tell me who I was. He looked up at Minerva and his voice did not shake, but it had gone careful in the way that cost him. That's why you took me, not just the cupboard. You took me before he could finish making me into someone who'd do what he said. Minerva did not soften it because softening it would have been a lie, and she did not pile on because that would have been cruelty dressed as honesty. I took you because of the cupboard, she said. I did not understand the rest of it, not the seat, not the proxy, not the shape of the hand, until I sat in this room 4 years ago and a goblin showed me. But yes, I think that is the size of it. I think a great man looked at an orphan and saw, somewhere underneath all his real grief and his real cleverness, a useful instrument that would be easier to wield if it were kept ignorant and obliged. I do not think he admits it to himself in those words. The dangerous ones never do. But yes, Lenin, that is what I took you out of. The cupboard was only the part you could see. There is more, said Gornock, if the air can bear it. The air can bear it, said Harry, and Minerva heard under the child's voice the first low note of the adult he would become, and was fierce and sorrowful about it in equal measure. Then we come to the matter of the cloak. Gornock rose, which he had not done for either of them, and crossed to a cabinet, and took from it a slim folder of papers tied in black ribbon, and brought it back and laid it on the desk. Among the heirlooms of your house, he said, there is one item the records describe with a respect the goblin nation does not extend lightly. An invisibility cloak. Cloaks of invisibility are not rare. An enchanter can make you a passable one for a few hundred galleons, and it will last a few years before the charm wears thin and the moths get the rest. This is not one of those. This cloak appears in the Potter records 700 years ago, already old, already perfect, passed eldest to eldest, never fraying, never failing, hiding its wearer from death itself. The family histories claim, though goblins do not traffic in that sort of poetry. It is the oldest thing your family owns. It is, the records suggest, the reason your family takes the place it does in certain old tales, for it came down from a man named Peveril, of whom older stories than mine are told. He tapped the folder. Your father had it. It was his by right, eldest of his line. And in the October before he died, he lent it to a friend who had asked to borrow it. To study it, the friend said, to examine its remarkable charms. The friend was Albus Dumbledore. The cloak was never returned. It has been in his keeping for 9 years. It is not his, it is yours. Harry looked at the folder. He borrowed my family's oldest thing, he said, the week before they died, and kept it. He kept it, said Gornock. Why? And there it was again, the question under the question, the thing Minerva had nurtured in him since he was 4. Not the seat. I understand the seat. The seat is power. Power is obvious. But a cloak, he's the most powerful wizard alive. Everyone says so. Why would a wizard like that hold on to a borrowed cloak for 9 years and not give it back to an orphan, when giving it back would have cost him nothing and looked kind? He frowned, working it. It must be worth more to him than it looks, more than a cloak. There's something about it I don't know yet, something he wants badly enough to be petty over. Gornock regarded the child for a long moment, and then he looked at Minerva, and something passed between the old goblin and the old witch that was almost amusement and almost respect, and was mostly the recognition of a mind. I told you the trait had bred true, he said. Yes, young Potter, there is something about it you do not know yet. There are old stories, half myth, about 3 brothers and 3 objects and a cloak that was one of them, and there are men who have spent their whole lives chasing those stories, and your cloak may be one of those objects, or it may merely be a very good cloak that the stories grew up around. I do not know which, and I will not pretend to, because you would catch me if I did. But I will tell you this for nothing, because it is sound banking and sound sense both. A thing a powerful man wants badly and quietly is a thing you should want back badly and loudly, until you understand why he wanted it. Reclaim it first, understand it after. Possession is the strongest argument in any court, goblin or wizard. We are agreed on that, at least, my people and yours. "We are agreed," said Harry with such grave 8-year-old finality that Minerva had to look hard at the green lamps for a moment. They turned then to the lineage, because Gornock was a methodical creature and would do nothing out of its proper order. He brought out a sheet of pale parchment and a silver knife so fine it looked like a splinter of the moon, and he explained precisely what he wanted. A single drop of the heir's blood freely given to wake the inheritance desk that the bank kept for old houses, which would write upon the parchment the true line of descent and confirm, beyond any forgery or any sealed will, who Harry was. "You needn't," Minerva said to him low. "Blood magic is old and serious, and I'll not have you do it because a goblin asked. It is your blood, it is your choice, it is always your choice in this room and out of it." Harry looked at the silver splinter and at the parchment and at the brass plate that said GORNUK, and he held out his hand. "I want to know who I am all the way down," he said. "I've wanted that since I was 6, this tells me I choose it." The cut was nothing, a bead of red on the ball of his thumb, and Gornock touched the parchment to it, and the blood ran out into the fibers and spread, and where it spread, names came up in a fine old hand branching backward into the dark. Potter. And above it the line splitting and rejoining and splitting again, Fleamont and Euphemia and Henry and Charles back and back, and at the root of it, 7 centuries down in letters that had gone half to gold, a single name that made even Gornock go still as he read it aloud. "Ignatus Peveril," said the goblin, "third of 3 brothers, so the stories do not lie about that part at least. You are the last of the Peverils through the Potter line, young Potter, and the cloak a great man borrowed and did not return is yours 700 years over, by blood and by name both, written now in your own blood on the bank's own parchment, where no seal of any chief warlock can ever touch it." He let the parchment dry and rolled it and sealed it in goblin wax and pushed it across the desk. "Keep that, it is the truest thing you own. It says in a court that cannot be argued with exactly who you are. There are people in your life who have profited from your not knowing. Let none of them ever again tell you your own name." And then, because the lineage was confirmed and the order of things permitted it, Gornock brought out the ring. It was the Potter's signet, heavy old gold worn smooth, a stag and a lily entwined about a single star, and it was far too large for an 8-year-old's hand, and Gornock did not try to put it on him. He set it on the desk between them in a nest of black velvet. "This is the heir's ring of your house," he said. "It is worn by the head of the family, and you are not the head of your family yet. You are its heir, which is a different and a waiting thing. At 17 it will fit your hand and answer to your magic and seat you in the Wisengamot in your own right. Today it cannot be worn. It can be acknowledged before a goblin witness, and acknowledged it should be, because the acknowledging is itself a kind of armor. From this hour the bank recognizes Harry James Potter as the named and blood-proven heir of the House of Potter and the line of Peveril, and will treat any claim to the contrary as fraud, and will defend that recognition with the full weight of the nation's law. There are not many things in this world a goblin will defend for a wizard. This is one: touch it, not to wear, to claim." Harry reached out and laid 2 fingers on the cold gold, and the ring warmed under them, just slightly, a flicker of recognition, the family magic finding the family blood after 9 years of dark, and Harry took his hand back and did not say anything for a moment because there was nothing adequate to say, and Minerva put her hand on the back of his neck, warm and steady, and that was adequate instead. "Now," said Minerva when the child had his face in order and her voice changed gear into the one Harry thought of privately as the campaigning voice, the one that had ended Mr. Pertwee. "Master Gornock, we have established what is his. Let us establish what we are going to do about the parts of it that other people are sitting on. I want 3 things, and I want to know the cost of each, as always." "As always," said Gornock, and took up his quill, and Harry understood that this, the part that came after the wonder, was the part that actually mattered, and he leaned in to learn how it was done. "1," said Minerva, "the proxy on the Wisengamot seat. Albus Dumbledore's guardianship ended 4 years ago when the will was executed and I was confirmed as guardian. Has his proxy ended with it?" "It should have," said Gornock, with the particular dryness that meant a thing was wrong. "A proxy is granted by the magical guardian and dies with the guardianship. When yours superseded his authority to vote the Potter seat lapsed in law. He has nonetheless continued to be recognized by the Wisengamot's clerks, on the strength of having held the proxy for 7 years, and no one troubling to check. The clerks are lazy, and he is the chief warlock, and these things acquire a momentum. It would take a formal instruction from the guardian of record, lodged with the bank and served upon the court to halt it." "Then lodge it," said Minerva. "Today, the Potter proxy is revoked. I am the guardian of record. Until the heir comes of age, the Potter seat will be voted by a proxy of my naming, and I name—" She paused, and Harry saw her decide something. "No one. I name no one. Let the seat sit empty and abstaining until its true holder can fill it himself at 17. An empty seat votes for nothing and can be leaned on by no one. It is the only honest thing to do with a vote that belongs to a child. Put that on the record, Master Gornock, and serve it loudly with the heir's blood-proven lineage attached, so that no clerk and no chief warlock can pretend confusion." Let the whole court learn on the same morning that the Potter seat has been voted these 7 years by a man with no right to it, and that the rightful house has now reclaimed and wrested it. I should like that to be a small public embarrassment. He has had a great many years of being thought the wisest man in the room. A little weather will do his judgment good. Gornock wrote, and there was relish in the scratching of his quill. The disbursements, they stopped when the guardianship changed, I trust. They stopped the day the will was executed. I stopped them myself with considerable satisfaction. Good. Then I want a full accounting, sealed and certified, of every nut that left this child's trust under the prior guardianship, where it went, and on whose authority, prepared in a form that would stand before the goblin nation and the Wisengamot, and should it ever come to that, the public. I do not say we will use it. I say we will have it, complete and unanswerable, in a drawer against the day it is wanted. A man behaves better when he knows the accounting exists. It is half prepared already, said Gornock. I began it the morning you first sat in that chair. It will be complete within the month. 3. Minerva's voice did not rise. The cloak. I'll not have the heir's oldest heirloom decorating the bottom of a great man's trunk a day longer than the law allows. I want it demanded. Formally from the bank, citing the blood-proven Peveril descent, citing the absence of any deed of gift, citing 9 years of a loan unreturned. He borrowed it. A loan that is never returned is not a gift. It is a thing held against the owner's right, and the owner is a child, and the bank is his trustee, and the bank may demand the return of trust property wrongfully withheld. Demand it, Master Gornock, in writing, with the full weight you spoke of. Gornock set down his quill. For the first time he looked not at Minerva but at Harry. This one I will not do on your word, Professor, guardian though you are, he said, because this one is the heir's heirloom and not the estate's gold, and the heir is old enough to be asked. Young Potter, the cloak is the oldest thing your family owns and possibly a thing out of legend, and the one who holds it is the most powerful wizard in Britain and your former guardian, and whatever else he is, not your enemy in the way the Dursleys were your enemy. Demanding it back will be a declaration. You will know past any doubt that you understand what he has done and that you mean to take back every piece of yourself he has been keeping. There is no quiet way to ask a great man to return a thing he has held for 9 years. Do you want it asked? Harry thought about it. He thought about it for a long time, longer than an adult would have credited an 8-year-old with, turning it as he turned the matchstick, looking for the exact shape of what he meant. The green lamps hissed. Minerva did not prompt him. She had spent 4 years teaching him that his choices were his, and she would not unsay it now to make this one easier. My dad lent it to a friend, Harry said at last, because he was kind and he trusted him. And the friend kept it after my dad died and couldn't ask for it back. That's not a thing you do to a friend. He looked up, and his green eyes, his mother's eyes, were very clear. I'm not asking for it to be cruel. I'm asking for it because it was my dad's and his dad's and 700 years of us, and it should hang on my wall next to his broom where it belongs, not in a trunk belonging to a man who's already got everything. Ask for it back, politely. The first time politely, but ask. He paused, and the next part came out flat and adult and entirely certain, and it was the thing Minerva would remember from that room for the rest of her life. And if he says no to a polite question, then we'll know exactly what kind of friend he really was, and that's worth knowing too. That, said Gornock, taking up his quill again, is the correct answer, and it is the answer your mother would have given, almost to the word. It will be demanded, politely, the first time. He wrote in silence for a moment, and the silence was a satisfied one. You will make a formidable head of your house, young Potter. I have managed Potter Gold for 31 years, and I do not say that lightly. I rather think I shall enjoy living long enough to manage it for you. Goblins do, you understand, live long enough for almost anything if a thing is interesting. You are shaping up to be interesting. They came back out into Diagon Alley an hour later, into the noise and the color and the staring had a different weight on Harry now, or he carried it differently, which came to the same thing. He had a rolled parchment in his coat, sealed in goblin wax, that said in his own blood exactly who he was. He had, somewhere far below their feet, an estate that no one could keep him ignorant of again. He had a ring he could not yet wear, and a cloak that was being demanded back in writing, and a seat that would sit empty and honest until he was a man. And he understood, walking up the crooked street in the sunlight with his hand in Minerva's, that all of it had been there all along, his the whole time, kept from him on purpose, and that the keeping had been a kind of theft no court would ever name as one. It would have been easy to let that curdle. He could feel the place in himself where it might. He had grown up in a cupboard at the hands of people who took, and he knew exactly how a person could decide somewhere in the dark that the world was made of takers and the only choice was whether to be taken from or to take. He stood at the mouth of that thought and looked into it, and then he said it aloud because he had been raised in a house where the dangerous thoughts were said aloud and looked at in good light rather than fed in secret. I could be angry about it, he said, all of it. The cupboard and the seat and the cloak and the gold I never knew about, there's enough there to be angry about for a whole life. There is, Minerva agreed. She did not tell him not to be. She never told him what to feel. She had decided long ago that a child told what to feel learns only to hide it. Anger is not a sin, Lanan. It is information. It tells you that something was wrong and a great deal was wrong, and you are right to know it. The question is never whether to feel it. The question is what you build out of it once you have. Some people build a wall and live behind it the rest of their lives and call the wall wisdom. Some build a weapon and spend their lives swinging it and call the swinging justice. And some, the rare ones, take the same anger and build something that keeps the next person out of the cupboard. She steered him round a puddle. You will choose in time what to build. You needn't choose today. I only ask that whatever you build it in the light where I can see it and where you can see it yourself. The things people build in the dark are the things that turn on them. Harry walked a few steps with that. He looked at the broom in the window as they passed it the other way, all show and no balance, and he found he did not want it, and he understood, dimly, that the wanting and the not wanting were both about more than brooms. I think, he said, I want to be the kind that builds the thing that keeps people out of the cupboard. He glanced up at her, suddenly young again, 8 and unsure. Is that a stupid thing to want? It sounds stupid out loud. It is the least stupid thing I have ever heard a person want, said Minerva, and her voice was steady, and she meant every word of it down to the bone. And a great many clever, important, dangerous men have grown old and grand without ever once managing to want it. You're 8 years old and you want it already. Hold on to it. It is rarer and harder than any cloak, and no one will ever be able to borrow it and forget to give it back. And then she stopped in front of a shop with a striped awning and a window full of impossible colors, and said in the dry, ordinary voice of the ordinary world, Florian Fortescue makes the only ice cream in Britain worth the name, and it is a hot day, and I have had quite enough goblins and great men for one morning. You have had a large day, and large days are not only for difficult magic, they are also for ice cream. What will you have? And before you ask, yes, you may have a thing that is 2 flavors at once. We have a long-standing arrangement, you and I, about thoroughly respectable people who cannot make up their minds. Harry looked up at her. The place in himself where the bitterness might have set its roots stayed empty, because she had filled the morning with too much else, with thanks for the account in it. Is always your choice, and a hand warm on the back of his neck, and a lesson about what to build out of anger, and a person whose mornings are full of those things has no room left over in which to become a taker. Both, he said, chocolate and raspberry, and one for you, and don't say you don't want one, because I'll know, and I always know. He grinned up at her, his father's grin in his mother's face, in the middle of the street that had wanted him to be a legend. I learned that off someone very stern. She's perfectly unbearable about it. She sounds insufferable, Minerva agreed, and steered him in out of the sun and bought 2 ice creams that were each 2 flavors at once, and they sat on the warm step of the shop and ate them while Diagon Alley flowed past, and a child who had walked into the bank in air and name walked out of the morning in air in fact, and the difference, she thought, watching him argue with himself over which flavor to finish last, was the whole of what she had come for. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. What was hidden? The cloak came home in the spring. Harry was 9, and it came home the wrong way, which told them more than the cloak itself ever could. It arrived by goblin courier, not by owl, in a flat box of black wood sealed with Gringotts wax, and inside it, folded with a care that was almost reverence, lay a thing of liquid silver gray that poured through the fingers like water and weighed nothing at all. Harry lifted it out, and the spring light went strange around it, bending, and when he swung it about his shoulders the rest of him simply stopped being there, so that Tilly shrieked and dropped a jug, and Minerva, who had seen a great many remarkable things in 70 years, set down her tea very carefully and said nothing for a while. But it was the letter folded on top of the cloak that mattered, and the letter was not from Dumbledore. It was from Gringotts, dry and exact, reporting that the demand had been answered, that the chief warlock had returned the property without contest and without comment beyond a single line, which Gringotts reproduced for the record because a goblin reproduces everything. The line read, I had hoped to return it myself in time and to explain. Perhaps that time has merely come sooner than I wished. I should like to call. A.D. He gave it back, Harry said. He had the cloak still half about him, one arm vanished to the elbow. Without a fight, I thought he'd fight. So did I. Minerva turned the goblin's letter in her fingers, which is precisely why I do not like it. A man who surrenders the thing you demanded and then asks to call is not surrendering. He is moving the fight to ground he prefers. He returned a cloak which costs him a cloak and buys him a conversation, and he would not make that trade unless he valued the conversation more than the cloak. He wants to talk to you, Harry, not to me. He has decided you are old enough to be talked to, and that frightens me more than the staring in Diagon Alley ever did, because the staring only wants you to be a story, and Albus wants you to be persuaded. Harry took the cloak the rest of the way off and folded it, and the world filled itself back in around him. Then we should let him come, he said. Better here than not, better while you're standing next to me than later when I'm at his school and you're not. It was a 9-year-old's voice in a much older sort of sense, and Minerva had long since stopped being surprised by the combination. I'd rather know what he wants. Knowing's the first defense. A goblin told me. A goblin told you well. She set the letter down. Very well, he may call. But not today and not unprepared, because there are things you must hear from me before you hear them, shaped by him. and I would rather you heard the hard ones in this kitchen, with the herons on the lock, than across a chessboard from a man who has been winning conversations since before either of us was born. So that evening, when the supper was cleared and the cloak hung on the wall of Harry's room beside his father's broom, where it had belonged for 700 years and had finally come home, Minerva sat her son down at the kitchen table and kept her promise, the oldest one, the one she had made on the first night. She did not lie to him, and she did not spare him, and she did not pretend the hard thing was easy. "You asked me once," she began, "when you were 6, why he came for your family. The dark wizard, why your mother and father, out of all the families in Britain. I told you no one fully understood it, and that was true, and it is still true, but it was not the whole of what I knew, and you are 9 now, and the time has come for the whole of it." She folded her hands on the table. "There is a thing called a prophecy. Do you know the word? A telling of the future before it happens." Harry had read widely. He had read the Green Book. He was suspicious of the future on principle. "They're mostly rubbish, self-fulfilling, or vague enough to mean anything you like. Mostly, yes, a great deal of prophecy is the rubbish of frightened people dressed up to sound like wisdom, and a wise person treats it accordingly." Minerva inclined her head. "But not all of it. There is a true sort, rare, terrible, that comes unbidden out of a real seer in a real trance, and it carries weight, the way a stone carries weight, whether you believe in stones or not. Such a prophecy was made shortly before you were born. I have never heard its words. Only 2 people alive have heard its words, and one of them is Albus Dumbledore, and the other is the one who carried half of it to the Dark Wizard and started all of this. I do not know what it says. I know only its shadow, the shape it has cast over everything that has happened to you, because I have spent 5 years tracing that shadow backward to its source." Harry had gone very still. He did not interrupt. He had learned from her that the still listening is the kind that catches everything. "The shadow is this," Minerva went on. "The Dark Wizard believed the prophecy spoke of a child who could undo him. A child born as the old year died, to parents who had thrice defied him. There were 2 such children that I know of. One was a boy named Neville Longbottom, whose mother and father you will meet one day, for they were brave past bearing and paid for it past bearing, and there is a story there too, and a grief, and we will tell it when you are ready. And one was you." And the Dark Wizard, for reasons known only to himself, looked at the 2 infants and chose to believe it was you. He came to Godric's Hollow to kill a prophecy in its cradle. He killed your father, who met him at the foot of the stairs with no wand to hand, and bought your mother her seconds. He killed your mother, who would not stand aside from your cot, though he offered her life again and again if she would only step away. And when he turned his wand on you, the prophecy, if that is what it was, did not die. You did not die. He did, or enough of him did that the world has had 9 quiet years to pretend he is gone for good. She let it sit. "I do not believe he is gone for good, neither does Albus. That is the root of everything Albus has done to you. He believes the Dark Wizard will return, and he believes the prophecy means you are the one who must face him when he does, and he has spent your whole life quietly arranging the board for a game he expects to be played across your back." The fire ticked. Out on the lock a heron called once and was answered. "That's why the cupboard," Harry said slowly. He was working it as he worked the matchstick, except that this would not turn into a needle no matter how he attended to it. This would only ever be what it was. He didn't put me with the Dursleys to keep me safe from the Dark Wizard, or not only. He put me somewhere that would make me into the right kind of weapon. Somewhere I'd be humble and grateful and alone and aching for someone to belong to, so that when he finally came for me with his beard and his sweets and his sad kind eyes, I'd do anything he said, because he'd be the first person who ever seemed to want me. Harry's voice did not rise. It went, if anything, quieter, and the quiet was worse. He wanted to raise a hero who'd die when he was told to. And he thought the best way to make one was to start with a boy who'd never been loved, so that a little love at the right moment would buy him everything I had. Minerva did not tell him he was wrong, because she was not certain he was, and she had promised never to lie to him, and the cruelest lie of all would have been comfort she could not stand behind. "I think," she said carefully, "that Albus Dumbledore loves the wizarding world genuinely, and grieves its dead genuinely, and would give his own life to save it without a second thought. And I think he learned a long time ago, in a tragedy of his own that I will tell you about another day, to distrust love in himself, to treat his own heart as a weakness to be managed, and that a person who has decided his love is dangerous will do terrible things in the name of duty and call it wisdom and never once notice the difference. I do not think he is a villain, Harry. I think he is something rarer and sadder. I think he is a good man who decided in his grief that he was permitted to use people, so long as he used them for good ends. And the trouble with deciding that is that there is no bottom to it, and the people you use are real people, and one of them was a baby in a cupboard." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I will not let him use you. That is the whole of why I came for you, even before I understood any of this. A child is not a weapon. A child is a child. I would rather lose every war he is so afraid of than win one of them with your life as the coin." Harry looked at their 2 hands on the table, hers gone papery with age, his still a boy's. "Will the Dark Wizard really come back? I don't know. Truly I don't, and I'll not pretend to. But if he does, she said, and now her voice did change and went hard and Highland and certain, then you will face him if you must as a person who is loved, who knows exactly who he is all the way down, who has gold and a name and a house and a home and a stern old woman at his back, and not as a lonely instrument grateful for crumbs. If he comes, he will not find the weapon Albus tried to forge. He will find a McGonagall. And I should very much like to meet the dark wizard who has ever got the better of one of those. It surprised a laugh out of Harry, wet and sudden, and she had counted on that, because she had learned that grief and laughter live closer together than anyone admits, and that the way you carry a child through the first is to keep a door open to the second. Poppy came the next day because Minerva had sent for her, and because Poppy Pomfrey was, by the words of a dead woman's will, the other guardian of this child, and had a right to stand in the room when a great man came calling. She arrived in a temper that she kept carefully banked, the temper of a healer who has spent a lifetime cleaning up after the decisions of important men, and she fussed over Harry as she had every autumn since he was 4, measuring him against the doorframe, frowning at his teeth, pronouncing him appallingly healthy and a credit to nobody but himself. And then when Harry had been sent to feed the owl so the grown-ups could speak as grown-ups do, she sat at the table and put her hand flat on the wood and said, "I'll be here when he comes, Minerva. The will names 2 of us." Lily named 2 of us on purpose because she knew one person can be argued out of anything by a clever enough tongue, and 2 people standing together cannot. I have spent 30 years watching Albus Dumbledore be the cleverest tongue in Britain. He'll not find me alone in a room with that child, and he'll not find you alone either. We were named together. We'll stand together. That was the whole point of naming 2. It was, Minerva agreed, and the 2 old friends sat a while in the kind of silence that is its own conversation. And Harry, coming back in from the owl, found them there, and understood, in the wordless way children understand the weather of a house, that the wall around him had just grown another stone, and that the stone had a name, and that the name was Poppy. He took the days before Dumbledore came and did with them what she had taught him to do with hard things. He carried them out into the daylight and looked at them. He went down to the loch those mornings and sat on the cold stones where he had watched the herons fish since he was 4, and he turned the whole of it over. He told Tilly some of it because Tilly had loved his parents and had a right to grieve them with him, and Tilly told him in return the things only an elf remembers, that his father had been frightened the night Harry was born, properly frightened for the first time in his loud, fearless life, and had sat up till dawn just watching the cot, and that his mother had laughed at him and then sat up watching it too. He learned that he came from people who watched over what they loved, and he decided, sitting on the cold stones with a heron working the shallows in front of him, that this was a thing he would inherit on purpose, the watching whatever else came down to him by blood. And he made a plan because he was 9 and clever and had been taught by a witch and a goblin both, and clever people who have been frightened make plans. He decided how he would sit and where and what he would and would not give away. He decided he would not pretend, because pretending was the enemy's country and he would not fight on it. He decided he would tell the truth and ask for the truth and watch, very carefully, what a great man did when he could not lie comfortably. He laid it all out the evening before, at the kitchen table, the 2 of them together, the same as she laid out everything. And Minerva listened to her 9-year-old plan his first confrontation with the most powerful wizard in Britain, and felt the particular fierce ache that is the whole reward of raising someone, the ache of watching them need you a little less than they did the day before. Dumbledore came on the 4th day, in the late afternoon, walking up from the loch as he always had. Harry watched him come from the window, this old man in robes the deep blue of evening, and felt the strangeness of it, that the figure from his nightmares and the figure from his story were the same gentle stooped shape picking its way up the path past the rowan tree. Dumbledore stopped at the rowan as he had years ago and laid his hand against the bark, and this time Harry was close enough through the open window to hear him murmur to it, "Still here then. Good, some things should be." And then he came on and knocked 3 soft taps, and Minerva opened the door and the reckoning began. She had laid it out beforehand, the 3 of them now, Poppy at the end of the table with her arms folded and her healer's eyes steady. Harry would be present. Harry was the subject of the conversation and would not be sent upstairs to listen through a floorboard like a small child, not any more. He would sit at the table. He would speak when he chose. And if at any moment he wished it to stop, he had only to say so and it would stop, because this was his house too and his life entirely, and no great man got to overrule that under this roof. Minerva, Poppy. Dumbledore took them both in and registered the pairing, and Harry watched him register it, watched the old man understand that the 2 names from the will had arranged themselves on purpose. Then his eyes went to Harry at the table with a tenderness that even now the child could not be certain was wholly false. "And Harry, how you have grown. The last time I saw you properly you were—" He stopped himself. "Forgive me, you were very small. You are not small now. You saw me on a doorstep," Harry said, "in November. You put me down and you left. It was not cruel. It was only exact, the exactness Gornock had taught him, the exactness that gave a great man nowhere comfortable to stand." You don't have to pretend you watched me grow. We both know you didn't. I'd rather we didn't pretend things. Professor McGonagall doesn't lie to me, and I've got out of the habit of being lied to. It's a hard habit to get back into, and I don't want to. Something moved behind the half-moon spectacles. Dumbledore sat slowly in the chair that was offered and folded his long hands on the table, and for a moment the kindly mask was set aside, and what looked out from behind it was very old and very tired and not, Harry thought, unkind, but something colder than unkind, certain. The certainty of a man who has done the sums of the whole world and believes himself the only one alive who can read the total. No, Dumbledore agreed. I did not watch you grow. I arranged for you to grow unwatched, which is a different thing, and I will not insult anyone at this table by pretending it was an accident. Minerva has clearly told you a great deal. She has always been a better teacher than I because she teaches people to think, and I, God forgive me, have spent my life teaching people to follow. I should like, if you will permit it, to tell you why. The whole of it. I find I have grown too old to carry it folded up any longer. Tell us, said Minerva, and sat, and the temperature of the kitchen settled into something still and clear, like the air before frost. He told them. He told them about the prophecy, though not its words, never its words. He guarded those even now, even here, which Harry marked and Minerva marked and Poppy marked, and none of them remarked upon yet. He told them about a dark wizard who had not died but had been unmade into something that waited, patient as a seed, for a way back into the world. He told them he believed, past any hope of being wrong, that the way back would be found, because the dark wizard had done things to himself, terrible things, old and forbidden things, to make certain that death would not be the end of him. He told them that when the way back was found, the prophecy would demand its reckoning, and that the reckoning would fall on Harry whether anyone willed it or no, because prophecies were not suggestions, and the dark wizard believed in this one absolutely, which made it true enough to kill by even had it been nonsense to begin with. And so, Dumbledore said, I made a choice. I decided that the child the prophecy named must survive long enough to fulfill it, and that survival, not happiness, was the only gift within my power to ensure. I placed you with your mother's blood, where an ancient protection would shield you from the dark wizard's surviving servants while he himself was gone. That much I will maintain to my grave was sound. The protection was real. It is the rest of it that I cannot defend, and so I will not try. He turned the ring of light the window threw on the table, an old man's nervous gesture, and went on, and he did not soften the words, which Harry respected distantly, even as he hated them. I hoped that a childhood without grandeur would keep you humble. I hoped that a childhood without indulgence would keep you hungry to be of use. I hoped that when the day came that I needed you to walk knowingly toward your own death for the sake of every other child in Britain, you would do it gladly because I would have raised you to believe that doing your duty was the only love you were ever going to be worth. That was my plan. It was monstrous. I believed, and some cold part of me still half believes, that it was necessary. I have never been able to decide which of those two things is the lie, and I have stopped expecting to. The kitchen was silent. Tilly in the corner had gone rigid, her enormous eyes brimming, one hand pressed hard over her mouth. Harry spoke before either of the women could, and what he asked was the question under the question, the one he had carried down to the lock and back. What do the exact words say? The prophecy. You've heard them. Tell me the exact words. And there it was. Dumbledore did not answer. The old face, which had borne the confession of monstrousness without flinching, closed like a door at that single request, and the silence stretched, and in the stretching of it Harry had his answer more completely than any words could have given it. You see, Harry said quietly to Minerva, not to Dumbledore, he'll tell us he raised me to die. He'll say that out loud at our table, but he won't tell me the words that are supposed to be about my own life, because the words are the one thing he's still keeping. The cloak he gave back, the gold he can't touch anymore, the seat sits empty, but the words he keeps because the words are the last bit of me he still gets to own. He looked back at the old man. That's how I know how wide the door can open. It can open exactly as wide as you're willing to tell me true things, and you just showed me you'll confess to anything except the one thing that would make us equal. So, a narrow door it is. Harry, said Dumbledore, and for the first time his voice had something in it that was not strategy. There are reasons. There are always reasons, said Minerva. That has never once been in doubt, Albus. You have a reason for everything. It is the having of a reason for everything that I have come not to trust. She did not raise her voice. He asked you a fair question in his own house about his own life, and you would sooner sit there having admitted to engineering his death than answer it. Hear how that sounds. I do not think you have heard how that sounds in a very long time, because no one around you ever says it. So let me, as your colleague of 30 years, it sounds like a man who has confused the keeping of secrets with the keeping of wisdom, and they are not the same, and the day you forgot it was the day you stopped being safe to follow. Dumbledore turned then to Harry, and the full weight of him came to bear, the warmth and the sorrow and the steel beneath both, the famous gentle voice that had bent ministers and ended wars. Then let me ask for what I can still honestly ask for. Not your trust, I have forfeited that, and I know it. A door. Leave a door open, Harry, no wider than you like. There are forces gathering that will not care in the slightest how you were raised, only that you exist. When the dark wizard returns, you will be hunted, and the people you love will be hunted to reach you, and on that day all the love in this good house will not be a wall high enough to stand behind. On that day you will need what I know. I am still the one man living who has studied your enemy for 50 years. I am not asking you to obey me, never again to obey me. I am asking you to leave a door, that is all. It was, Harry would think later, the most dangerous thing anyone had ever said to him, because almost all of it was true, and the true parts were the bait wrapped around the hook, and a lesser-raised boy would have swallowed the whole of it on the strength of the parts he could verify. He felt the pull of it. He felt how badly the lonely child who still lived somewhere inside him wanted to say yes, wanted the great wise man to be proud of him, wanted to be needed by someone so important and so sad. He stood at the mouth of that wanting and looked into it in good light as he had been taught and did not step in, and the kitchen around him began very quietly to change. He did not mean it to. That was the thing he would remember about it for the rest of his life. He had not reached for it. But 9 years of magic that ran deeper than was decent in any child, all of it gathered up in the press of the moment, in the grief, in the cold, clear anger, and the terrible, seductive pull of being wanted by a man who would spend him like a coin, went looking for somewhere to go and found the salt cellar on the table. The everyday china one with the chip in the rim, the sergeant's salt cellar, and without a word or a wand it flowed, the porcelain running smooth and certain and complete. And where the cracked salt cellar had stood there was a thing of seamless white marble, perfect, cold, unbreakable. The chip healed away as though it had never existed at all. Dumbledore looked at it. He was very old, and he had seen a very great deal in his long life, and Harry watched the ancient eyes go to the transfigured marble and understood, from the stillness that came over that folded face, that he had just shown the most powerful wizard in Britain something Dumbledore had not expected and did not like. Wandless, Dumbledore said softly, under no instruction, in the grip of feeling, holding perfect form, at 9 years old. He looked at Minerva, and there was something in the look that was almost accusation and almost awe. "What have you been teaching him?" "To attend," said Minerva. "Intention, then attention. He has been making needles out of matchsticks since he was 7, Albus, and he stopped needing me to set the matchstick out for him more than a year ago. You wanted a humble instrument, ground down and grateful and easy to lift. You will have to make do with a McGonagall who can mend a broken thing without touching it, because that is what was actually growing in your cupboard, and that is what walked out of it. You did not raise a weapon. You very nearly wasted one of the great talents of his generation under some muggle's stares, and the only reason you did not is that one tired old teacher could not stop thinking about a child she had left behind. Be grateful for me, Albus. You spend so much of your life being clever. Try just the once being grateful instead." Harry put his hand flat on the cold marble of the salt cellar. He had not known until that moment that he could do such a thing. He looked at it, and he looked at the old man across the table, and when he spoke his voice was steady, and it was his own, and it owed nothing to anyone in the room or out of it. "I'll leave a door open," he said, "not because I trust you, I don't, and I'd be a fool to. But because Professor McGonagall taught me that you build the thing that keeps people out of the cupboard, and if there's really a dark wizard coming, then everything you know is part of the wall, and I won't tear out part of the wall to spite the one who built it badly. So, a door, open this much." He held up his finger and thumb, a crack of space between them. "You can teach me what you know about my enemy. That is all you get to teach me. You don't get to teach me what to want, or what I'm worth, or when I'm allowed to be loved. Those are taken. Those positions are filled." He set his hand flat on the table, beside the marble, beside Minerva's, beside Poppy's. "And the first time you try to widen that door by an inch without asking, I close it for good, and I learn what you know from somebody else, even if it takes me longer, even if it's harder, even if it's more dangerous, because I would rather face him slow and free than fast in yours. Do we understand each other?" For a long moment Albus Dumbledore looked at the 9-year-old across the table, the child he had meant to raise in a cupboard into a grateful sacrifice, who had instead been raised in a house above a lock into something he had not planned for and could not steer, and Harry saw, with a strange lurch, did not entirely regret having failed to steer. And the old man bowed his head, the genuine article this time, the bow Harry would later learn that Dumbledore gave to almost no one living. "We understand each other," said Dumbledore. "Better, I think, than I have been understood in a very long time." He rose. At the door he paused and turned back, and for once there was no performance in it at all, only an old man looking at a thing he had nearly destroyed and had instead, by the grace of his own failure, helped to make. "You were right, Minerva," he said, "on that doorstep. I was wrong, and you were right, and I have spent 9 years being too proud to say so out loud. Thank you for taking him. I mean it with the whole of what is left of me. Thank you for taking him before I could finish what I had started." He inclined his head to Poppy. "Both of you." She named 2 of you. "She was wiser than all of us, your Lily, even at the very end, especially at the end." And then he was gone down the path past the Rowan, blue against the dusk, an old man walking back toward a castle and a war and a long account that was not yet settled and might never be. and Harry stood at the window and watched him go and felt the marble salt cellar cooling under his hand and did not feel in any part of himself like a weapon. It was much later, when Poppy had gone and the dishes were done and Tilly had been sent off weeping happily to bed and the fire had burned down to its red heart, that Harry asked the question he had been carrying all day, the one under all the others. "Will you ever send me away?" He was sitting on the hearthrug where he had fallen asleep over the atlas as a small child, and he did not look at her when he asked it. He looked at the fire. To him, or to the school where he is, or to the war when it comes. If they all say it's for the greater good and everyone important agrees and it's the wise thing, the grown-up thing to do, will you send me because it's what you're supposed to do? Minerva came and sat down on the hearthrug beside him, which she had not done in years, her old knees protesting the whole journey, and she did not answer quickly, because a quick answer to that question would have been a small one, and the question was not small. "There is a thing I have not done," she said at last, "that I have meant to do for 2 years and kept putting off because I am a coward about the things that matter most, which is a failing I share with the one who just left, and I do not enjoy the resemblance. I have called you my heir. I have given you the grimoire and the house and my name to set beside your own. But I have not made it true the way the deepest magic makes things true, in blood and in binding, because to do that is to say, before the oldest law there is, that you are mine and I am yours, and no power on earth or under it gets to undo it. I have been afraid to ask, in case you felt I was taking something, the way every soul who held you before me took." She turned to him in the firelight. "So I will ask now, and you will answer freely, the way you answer everything in this house, and there is no wrong answer, because it is your life and not mine. Harry, will you let me adopt you, not as a ward, not as an heir only, as a son by blood and by the old binding, so that the law of magic itself recognizes what has been true in this kitchen since the first night, that you are my boy and I am yours, and that no chief warlock and no prophecy and no greater good will ever again be able to say otherwise? Will you have me, for good and for keeps?" Harry did not answer in words. He had not answered in words on the first night either, when she asked if he believed her. He had only loosened his grip on the blanket and slept. He answered now as he had answered then, which was with the whole of himself, turning and putting his arms around her neck as he had not let himself do since he was 4 and frightened, and holding on, and Minerva McGonagall held her son on the hearthrug of her mother's house and discovered that there were, after all, some things a stern old woman could not keep her voice steady through, and decided, for the second time in his life, not to try. They did the binding the next morning under the rowan tree, with Poppy standing witness, because the will had named 2 guardians, and it seemed right that both should see the thing made whole, and because the rowan had guarded the threshold of her people for 3 generations, and it seemed right to do the oldest thing where the oldest thing already stood. It was not complicated. The old magic rarely is. It is the cheap magic that needs the long incantations. There was a cup and a drop of her blood and a drop of his, freely given, mingled in water drawn from the lock. There were words in the older tongue that her grandmother had taught her, and that she had never once thought to use, because she had never thought to have a child of her own, and that came up out of her now, as though they had only been waiting all this while for the occasion. And there was the moment at the end when the magic took, when something vast and quiet and absolutely certain settled over the 2 of them under the gray morning sky, a recognition older than the ministry and the Wisengamot and the prophecy and the whole tangled human business of who belonged to whom, a recognition that said, simply, kin. The rowan, which had stood through 3 generations of McGonagall griefs and joys, chose that moment to come into early bloom, a full fortnight before its season, white flowers opening all along its dark branches, the old tree saving its bloom for an occasion, and having at last found one worth the spending. "Well," said Minerva McGonagall, looking up at the impossible early flowers, her son's hand in hers and Poppy weeping cheerfully into a handkerchief beside them, and the loch gray and patient below, and the whole green world washed clean by a morning that had no business being so bright so early in the spring. "It approves. It is a stern judge, the rowan, and slow to bloom, and it has decided in your favor, which is more than it has done for most who have stood beneath it. Welcome to the family, Harry James Potter McGonagall. You were always in it. Now even the tree knows, and the tree is the last word on the subject, and the tree does not lie any more than I do." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The letter came on a Tuesday at the end of July by an owl Harry knew, and it was addressed in green ink to Mr. H.J. Potter McGonagall, the room under the eaves, the house at Cairnloch by Loch Can, and it was signed at the bottom in a hand he had been reading his whole life by Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Harry read the signature twice and then looked up across the breakfast table at the woman who had written it. "You sign my Hogwarts letter," he said. "I sign all of them," said Minerva, buttering toast with the unbothered precision of a woman who has caught a great many people off guard at breakfast and enjoys it. 1,100 of them every July in my own hand, because Albus thinks a printed signature wants for ceremony, and I am inclined, for once, to agree with him. I have signed your letter every year since you were born, in the sense that yours was always going to be among them. I confess I took a certain quiet pleasure in writing your name this morning. It is a good name. I had a small hand in both halves of it. She had been deputy headmistress and professor of transfiguration for longer than Harry had been alive, which was a thing he had grown up knowing as plainly as he knew the herons fished at dawn, a fact of the landscape rather than a surprise. For his first years she had taken the long leave a witch of her standing could command, and stayed at Cairnloch and made the porridge. When he was 7 and steady she had gone back, because she loved the work and because a person ought not give up the whole of herself even for a child she loves, and she had flewed to the castle each morning from the hearth at Cairnloch, and flewed home each night smelling of chalk and candle smoke, and Harry had grown used to that too. He had visited the school in the summers, when it stood empty and echoing and entirely theirs, and learned its moving staircases and its secret passages and the particular ghost who haunted the third-floor lavatory, and had been fed treacle tart in the kitchens by elves who knew Tilly and approved of him on her recommendation. He was, in short, the only first-year in Britain who already knew his way to the Transfiguration classroom and could find the kitchens in the dark. It changed the shape of the thing entirely. He was not, like the others would be, a child being sent away from home to a castle of strangers. He was going to his mother's place of work. The strangeness ran the other way. It was the rest of the world that would be new, the other 11-year-olds, the dormitory, the being one of many. Hogwarts itself was nearly as familiar to him as the loch. It's still strange, he said, turning the heavy letter in his hands. I've been to the castle 100 times. Always with you, always in summer, always when it's empty. Now I'll be in it without you, sleeping in a tower instead of under the eaves, eating in the hall with 1,100 people instead of here with you and Tilly and the sergeant. He set the letter down, and he'll be there at the high table every day, watching. He will. Minerva did not pretend otherwise, she never did. And so will I at the high table beside him watch you, which I rather think will cramp his style considerably. You will not be sleeping under the eaves, no, but you will be a flue call in a corridor away from my office every day of term, and my door does not lock against you and never will, and if you need your stern old mother at 2 in the morning you will have her in her dressing gown, frightening the portraits. That is the part the other children will not have, Harry, and I'll not pretend it away to make you feel ordinary. You are not ordinary. You are mine, and I work there, and that is an advantage, and a McGonagall uses her advantages. She poured the tea, milk last. As for him, we had our reckoning. The door is open the width you set it, and not a hair wider, and he has kept to it for 2 years now, which is more discipline than I expected of him, and exactly as much as I demanded. He will teach you what he knows of your enemy when the time comes, and he will keep his hands off the rest of you, because he knows that the day he reaches for more, I close the door and the whole castle learns why. We have an understanding. It is not friendship. It is something stronger between people like us. It is terms. Harry drank his tea and thought about terms and watched the herons, and felt the particular vertigo of a door opening onto a life he had been told about all his years and was only now to walk through. The general missed his fish. His lady caught hers. Some things, at least, would go on exactly as they always had, whatever happened to him in a castle full of strangers with one familiar stern face at the high table. They went to Diagon Alley on the first clear day in August, and their first stop was the bank, because a person cannot shop without gold, and because Harry had turned 11 in July, and on a wizard's 11th birthday a great many doors open at once. The chief of them, in the plain practical sense, was the trust vault his great-grandfather had opened a century before for the schooling of Potter children, which was now, by the rules and by his age, his to draw upon with his own hand. Gornock received them in the iron room with the green-flamed lamps, where Harry had first learned the shape of his own power 3 years before, and the old goblin looked at Harry, who had grown a head taller since, and set down his quill with the precision of a man docking a ship. "You are 11, said Gornock, by way of greeting. "The trust vault opens to your hand today. I have prepared the key." He pushed a small brass key across the desk, warm-looking in the green light, and beside it a single sheet of parchment. "And an accounting, as I promised your guardian 3 years ago. Every nut that ever left this vault under the prior arrangement where it went, on whose authority. Complete, sealed, unanswerable. I do not say you will ever need it. I say you have it, and a person who has the truth in a drawer sleeps better than a person who suspects it in the dark. It is yours now with the key. The full estate remains in trust until you are of age. But this much, the schooling vault, is yours to spend, and you will spend it today, for the first time, with your own hand and no one's leave, and I find I should like to see it. I have watched gold move in and out of Potter vaults for 31 years on the instructions of dead men and great men. I have a professional curiosity about what the heir does with the first of it that is purely his." Harry took the key and turned it in his fingers and felt the weight of it, which was not the weight of the metal. "I'll buy my school things," he said, "books and a cauldron and a wand, and I'll leave the rest where it is because I don't need it, and a person who spends gold he doesn't need is a person who'll need gold he hasn't got later. My great-grandfather opened this for schooling. I'll use it for schooling, that's what it's for." He looked up. "Thank you, Master Gornock, for the accounting." For the 31 years, for not letting it be stolen while no one was looking, even when it would have been easier to let it go. The old goblin inclined his head a precise half-inch, the goblin embrace, spoken like the head of a house which you are not yet but will be, and sooner than any of us would wish, I think. He took up his quill again. Go and spend your schooling gold, young Potter, and mind the wandmaker. He talks a great deal of doom over his counter, and most of it is theater, but not quite all, and a wise customer learns to tell the difference. Your mother could, I expect you can too. They went down to the deep vault in a cart that rattled through the dark, and Harry filled a pouch with gold that was his and no one else's, and came back up into the August sun with the brass key on a cord round his neck under his shirt where it would stay, and the feeling of it there changed how he walked, very slightly, the way a small true thing changes a person. Then Minerva kept the promise she had made when Harry was 8, on a hot afternoon outside a bookshop 3 years before. An entire wicked afternoon, she announced, steering him through the crooked street. I believe those were the terms, and you may buy 3 more books than your list requires, which is the correct number of extra books, being precisely as many as one can carry without a featherlight charm, and you may not have a featherlight charm because that would defeat the moral instruction of the exercise. The bookshop swallowed them for an hour and a half. Harry came out with his list and his 3 extra, which after agonizing negotiation became 4 extra when Minerva caught sight of a treatise on the theory of conjuration she had wanted herself and bought 2 copies on the spot, declaring it a gift and therefore exempt from the count, which Harry pointed out was exactly the sort of reasoning she had warned him against, and which she ignored with the serenity of a woman who has been winning that argument with herself for 60 years. They bought his cauldron, pewter, standard size, and his scales and his crystal phials, and a brass telescope for astronomy, and a set of dragonhide gloves for herbology, and a folding knife for the preparation of potion ingredients, and a pointed hat, and a winter cloak with silver fastenings, and a trunk to hold all of it, oak-bound and brass-cornered. They bought parchment and ink by the ream, because Harry wrote as he read, greedily. The afternoon filled up with the ordinary holy business of getting a child ready for school, which Minerva had done for 1,100 other people's children every year for 40 years, and had never once, until now, done for her own, and Harry watched her enjoy it quietly, behind the brisk efficiency, and did not remark on it, because some things are spoiled by being named. At Madame Malkin's he stood on the stool to be measured for his robes, and it was there, among the bolts of black wool, that he met the first member of his year he had ever spoken to. Another first year was already on the second stool, being pinned, a round, anxious child with a way of holding very still as though movement might make things worse, and a toad clutched in both hands that he was clearly afraid of dropping and equally afraid of holding too tightly. He looked at Harry and his eyes did the thing, the flick to the forehead in a way, but it was a frightened flick rather than a hungry one, and he went scarlet and looked down at his toad, plainly mortified to have been caught looking. That's a handsome toad, said Harry, because Minerva had taught him that the road through the staring was to be a person, and because the other child had the look of someone no one had said a kind thing to all day. What's he called? Trevor, he mumbled, astonished to be addressed. He's always trying to get away. Gran says I'll lose him before Christmas. He swallowed. I'm Neville Longbottom. Harry did not let his face change, though the name landed in him like a stone into the lock, ringing all the way down. Longbottom, the other child, the one the dark wizard might have chosen instead, the one whose parents Minerva had said were brave past bearing and paid for it past bearing, the grief she had promised to explain when he was ready. He looked at the round, anxious child clutching his runaway toad, who might in some other turning of the world have grown up with the scar and the staring in the cupboard, who might have been the one a great man tried to forge into a weapon, and Harry felt something go quiet and fierce and protective in him, the watching he had decided to inherit on purpose. I'm Harry, he said, and held out his hand and left off the rest of it because the rest of it could wait, because right now this was just a frightened boy with a toad, and Harry was not going to be the 100th person that summer to make Neville Longbottom feel like a footnote in somebody else's story. Harry Potter McGonagall. If Trevor keeps trying to escape, there's a charm for it, a tethering charm, dead easy. I'll show you on the train. We can sit together if you like. I don't know anyone either. Neville Longbottom looked at him as though Harry had handed him the moon, and a formidable woman in a vulture-topped hat who could only be the Grand turned from the counter and looked at Harry with sudden sharp attention, taking in the second name, the McGonagall, and her stern old face moved through several things and settled on something near approval. Longbottom and Potter sitting together, she said. Well, your grandfathers would have liked that. Mind you keep hold of the toad. And that was that, and Harry had a friend, his first one his own age, made over a stool at Madame Malkin's in the space of 3 minutes, exactly as Minerva had taught him friends were made, by being a person to someone who needed one. They bought the owl before the wand, because Minerva said a person should choose a familiar in a good mood and a wand in a serious one, and the 2 states did not mix. Emporium was a riot of feathers and yellow eyes, and Harry walked its aisles slowly, and the owls watched him, and he watched them, and at the end of a high row in a cage by herself, a snowy owl the color of the loch in January regarded him with eyes like amber lamps and a profound and personal disdain that he found he liked enormously. "That one thinks she's too good for me," he said. "She is too good for you," said Minerva, "and she knows it, and she will spend 10 years proving it, and you will adore her. That is the correct basis for any important relationship. Take her." So they took her, and Harry named her Hedwig out of a book of wizarding history he had read at 9, and Hedwig accepted the name with the air of a queen permitting a courtier to address her, and bid him once gently to establish terms, and then allowed him to carry her cage, which Minerva noted was a higher honor than she herself had been granted in 20 years of acquaintance with owls. And then there was Ollivander's, and the afternoon changed its weather. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of dust and secrets, and the thousands of long boxes climbed into shadow on every side, and the old wand-maker who came gliding out from between them had eyes the pale silver of moonlit water in a manner that suggested he was reading something written on the inside of a person's skull. He looked at Minerva first and inclined his head. "Professor." Fur and dragon heartstring 9.5 inches unyielding, a fine wand for transfiguration as its mistress has amply proved. It serves you still. It does, Mr. Ollivander, 40 years and never a complaint. They so rarely complain to us, we hear about it from the furniture. His pale eyes moved to Harry, and they sharpened, and his gaze went, as everyone's did, to the thin line on the child's brow, except that Ollivander did not look away from it, embarrassed. He looked at it the way a scholar looks at a difficult text. "And here's the other half of the afternoon. I wondered when I should see you, Mr. Potter. It seems only yesterday your mother and father stood where you're standing, buying their first wands. Willow for her, supple 10.25 inches, lovely for charm work. Mahogany for him, 11 inches, pliable, excellent for transfiguration, though he favored it for less reputable purposes. I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, every single one." His gaze flicked once back to the scar. "It is the wands I remember even more clearly than the customers that trouble my sleep." The measuring began, the tape doing its work on its own while Ollivander pulled boxes, and the trying began, wand after wand snatched back almost before Harry had raised it, the old wand-maker growing more delighted with each failure, murmuring, "Tricky customer, tricky, will find the match, oh yes," until the counter was a drift of rejected boxes, and Harry had begun to wonder whether wands worked on him at all. And then Ollivander went very still, somewhere in the middle distance of his own thoughts, and said, "I wonder," and glided away into the deepest shadow of the shop, and came back with a box dustier than the rest, and opened it with a care the others had not received, and lifted out a wand of pale wood. "Holly," he said softly, "and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. Go on, give it a wave." Harry took it, and the moment his fingers closed on it, he felt it, as he had felt the marble run out of the cracked salt cellar, a warmth that started in his hand and ran up his arm and into the center of him, a recognition, the wand knowing him and being known. He raised it, and a stream of red and gold sparks broke from the tip and lit the dusty shop like a small private dawn, and Hedwig hooted approval from her cage, and Minerva by the door let out a breath she had not announced she was holding. "Oh yes," whispered Ollivander. "Oh, very good, very, very good indeed." And then the strange weather came fully in, and the pale eyes fixed on Harry with something that was not quite pity and not quite awe. "Curious," he said. "Curious, curious." "What's curious?" said Harry, who had been raised to ask the question under the question and was not about to stop now. "I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, every one. It so happens that the phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave one other feather, just one other. It is very curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar." The shop was very quiet. Harry held the wand, which was warm and right in his, and understood in the cold, clear fashion he had learned to understand things, exactly what the old wand-maker was telling him. That the wand in his hand and the wand that had killed his mother were brothers, born of the same bird, and that the world had a sense of symmetry that did not care in the least for the comfort of children. He looked at the wand, he looked at the old wand-maker. And then he did the thing that he would remember afterward as the moment he stopped being a child who had things done to him and became a person who decided what they meant. "No," he said. Ollivander blinked. "I beg your pardon. It's not curious. It's a coincidence or it's a pattern, and either way it doesn't get to mean anything I don't let it mean." Harry's voice was steady, and it was 11 years old, and it owed everything to a house above a loch. "A wand is wood and feather and the choosing. This one chose me. The bird gave a feather to the thing that killed my mum, and it gave a feather to me, and that's the bird's business, not mine. It doesn't make me his shadow. It doesn't make me his match. It doesn't make me anything at all. I'm not going to spend my life being the brother of a wand. I'm going to spend it being the son of a witch who taught me that a thing is what you make of it, not what it came from." He set the right weight of gold on the counter, his own gold, drawn that morning from his own vault with his own key. "I'll take it, because it's a good wand and it chose me, not because it's curious. Curious is your word, Mr. Ollivander, it isn't mine." For a long moment the old wandmaker looked at him, the pale silver eyes wide, and then something in the ancient face eased, and he wrapped the wand in brown paper with hands that were almost gentle. 7 galleons, he said. In Mr. Potter I have sold wands for a very long time, and watched what their owners made of them, and I will tell you without charge that I have rarely sold a wand to a person who understood so young that the wand does not write the wizard. Your mother would be proud. I knew her a little. She would be very proud indeed. He handed over the parcel. Use it well. I expect we shall all hear of it in time. Outside in the ordinary sun of Diagon Alley, Minerva walked beside him in silence for a while, which was its own kind of speech. Then she said, "Your father bought toffees the day he got his wand and ate the entire bag before they reached the leaky cauldron and was sick on the night bus. I tell you this so that you will know what you come from on both sides, brilliance and toffees in roughly equal measure." She put her hand on the back of his neck, the old gesture warm and steady. "What you said in there about the wand not writing the wizard, I have been teaching that to children for 40 years, and I have never once heard it said better, and you said it at 11, to Garrick Ollivander, who frightens grown wizards into dropping their boxes. I am going to be insufferable about this for weeks. You may as well brace for it now." "Brace for it," Harry agreed, grinning, his father's grin in his mother's face, the wand that chose him warm under his arm, and they went to find ice cream, because some afternoons demand it, and this was plainly one. Dumbledore asked to see them both once before the start of term, and they met him not at Cairnlock this time, but in the headmaster's office at the castle, on ground that was neutral only in the sense that it was very much his, all whirring silver instruments and a sleeping phoenix on a perch and the portraits of dead headmasters pretending to doze. He was older than he had been 2 years before. The hand that poured the tea had a tremor in it that Harry marked and said nothing about. But the eyes behind the half-moons were the same, and so was the thing beneath, the kindliness, the certainty, banked now but not gone, never gone. "You will be sorted in 3 days," Dumbledore said, when the pleasantries had been observed, "into one of 4 houses by a hat that sees more than is comfortable. I will not pretend I do not have a preference, Harry. A boy raised by the head of Gryffindor, bearing such courage as you have already shown, would grace my old house, and I will not insult you by hiding that I should be glad to see it." He set down his cup, and the steel came up through the kindliness, gentle as ever and twice as deliberate. "I will say only this, as headmaster and not as anything else. The castle is full of children. Most of them have never been spoken to as you have been spoken to, never been taught to weigh a great man's words and find them wanting. You will be, I think, a very unusual student. I would ask, for the good of the school, that you not make a project of teaching the others to distrust their teachers. There is a difference between a child who thinks and a child who corrodes, and the line between them is not always visible from the inside." And there it was, the last maneuver, dressed beautifully as concern, the suggestion that Harry's hard-won habit of thinking was a contagion to be quarantined, that being raised to question authority was a thing he owed the school to keep quietly to himself. Harry felt the shape of it. He had been feeling the shapes of Dumbledore's sentences for 2 years and had grown good at it. But it was Minerva who answered, and she set down her own cup with a click that woke 2 of the dozing portraits. "Albus," she said, "you have just asked my son not to teach other children to think in those precise words and called it the good of the school. Listen to yourself. The good of the school is children who think. It has always been the good of the school. The trouble is not that Harry will teach them to question their teachers. The trouble is that he will teach them to question you specifically, because he is the one child in 1100 who was not raised to find you infallible, and you have grown so used to being found infallible that an 11-year-old's clear eyes feel to you like corrosion." She rose, gathering her things. The audience ended on her authority and not his. He will be a credit to whatever house takes him. He will be kind to the friendless and hard on the cruel, because that is how his mother was and how I raised him to be. And if along the way a few other children learn from him that it is permitted to ask a grown man to tell the truth, then the school will be the better for it. And so, Albus, if you can find the humility, will you? Come, Harry, we have a trunk to pack. At the door Harry paused and turned back, because Minerva had taught him that you do not leave an enemy guessing when you can leave him informed. "I'll be fair to you," he said to the old man, "because being fair is part of the wall I'm building, and I won't tear it down even for you. I won't go round telling people you can't be trusted. I'll just answer honestly if anyone asks me anything, because that's how I was raised. If that costs you, it isn't because I corroded anything. It's because honesty costs you now, and it never used to, and that's worth you knowing." He inclined his head, a fair imitation of a goblin's half-inch. "Thank you for the tea, headmaster. I'll see you at the feast." And he followed his mother out, and behind them, very softly, the oldest portrait on the wall said to the headmaster, "The McGonagall woman has a point, Albus," and the headmaster did not answer, and the phoenix slept on. The last evening at Cairnlock was the kind that fixes itself in memory whole, every detail keeping, so that years afterward Harry could call back the precise slant of the August light off the loch, and the smell of the supper till he had insisted on cooking entirely by hand, because magic was not good enough for the night before Master Harry went to school. The trunk stood packed by the door, his name on a brass plate Gornock had sent without being asked, H.J. Pottermcgall, the two halves of him stamped into metal. His father's broom was coming, against the rule that first years could not have brooms, because Minerva was deputy headmistress and had decided that an heirloom was not a broom within the meaning of the rule and dared anyone to argue the point with her. The cloak was packed, folded small, weighing nothing. The grimoire was staying because it lived at Cairnloch and would wait for him, the way the herons waited and the rowan waited and the house itself waited, patient as books. The sergeant, after long deliberation, was coming, riding in the top of the trunk where he could survey the journey, because a person does not leave behind the soldier who guarded the salt for 7 years on the mere grounds of being too old for him. Harry was not too old for him. Harry had decided he would never be too old for him, and had said so aloud, and Minerva had agreed that this was the correct decision and the mark of a sound character. They sat up later than they should have, the two of them, by the fire, and they did not talk about the things that were too large to talk about, the leaving and the watching and the war that might or might not come. They talked about small things, as people do on the eve of large ones, whether Hedwig would settle in the owlery, whether Neville would keep hold of his toad, whether the treacle tart at the feast would be as good as the kitchen elves' summer version, whether Harry should, on the whole, try to be sorted anywhere in particular, to which Minerva gave the only honest answer, which was that the hat had never once been wrong in her hearing, and that wherever it put him would be where he belonged, and that she would be proud at the high table whether he wore scarlet or blue or yellow or green, and would fight anyone who suggested one house was better than another, having taught brilliant children and dreadful children out of all 4 of them in equal measure. "What if it puts me somewhere away from you?" Harry asked at last, the question under all the small ones. "Not Gryffindor, somewhere that isn't yours." "Then you will be exactly as much mine as you are tonight," said Minerva, "which is entirely and for good and witnessed by a tree. A house is where you sleep and whose scarf you wear and who you cheer for at Quidditch. It is not who you belong to. You belong to a house above a loch, and a stern old woman and a fierce small elf and 2 laughing people in a photograph, and no hat in the world has the authority to sort you out of that. Wear whatever color you are given and wear it well. Come home for Christmas and tell me you were right about everything, which you will be insufferably, having been raised by me." She banked the fire for the night, the last time she would bank it with him under the roof for a long while. "Bed, Lenin. We have a train to meet in the morning, and I should like, at the very least, the satisfaction of you not being late for it." The morning was bright and cold off the loch, and Tilly wept all through the porridge and pressed upon Harry a hamper of food sufficient for the entire first-year intake, and stood at the door under the rowan wringing her hands and making him promise to write, to eat, to wear his scarf, to come home, until Harry crouched down and hugged the fierce small elf and promised all of it twice. Hedwig glared from her cage at the indignity of travel. The sergeant rode in the top of the trunk, surveying the proceedings, and then it was time. Minerva took him to King's Cross herself, because she would not have her son go to the train alone like a parcel, and she would apparate to the castle from the platform once the engine had pulled him away, in time to be at the high table when he arrived, which she pointed out was the great advantage of the arrangement, that she got to say good-bye twice and feast with him the same night. They came onto platform 9 3/4 through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, and the scarlet engine stood steaming under the iron and glass roof, and the platform was a churning sea of trunks and owls and cats and weeping mothers and shouting brothers, and the particular bright chaos of 100 families sending their children off into the year. The staring found him here too, of course, rippling out across the platform as the name passed from mouth to mouth, but Harry walked through it with his mother's hand on his shoulder and the key warm at his throat, a person and not a story, and he found that the staring had no purchase on him any more, that he had grown a skin against it somewhere in the years of being loved, and the discovery was its own small farewell to the child who had once flinched from a leakwitch in Diagon Alley. Neville found them towed by his gran and the 2 grandmothers, for the vulture-hatted lady was every inch a grandmother of the old school, looked at each other and recognized each other the way generals recognized generals, and exchanged precisely 4 words of mutual respect, and that was settled too. Harry and Neville would sit together, and would be watched over from 2 directions at once, which Harry thought, privately, the dark wizard would find a great deal harder going than a single lonely boy in a cupboard. Then the whistle blew, and there was the scramble of last embraces all down the platform, and Minerva turned Harry to face her, and crouched, the old knees protesting, so that the height went out of her and they were eye to eye, as she had crouched on a Surrey doorstep 7 years before to a child who did not yet believe anyone would come. "I will not make you speak," she said. "You know all of it already. I have spent 7 years saying it, in porridge and in matchsticks and in the not locking of doors. So I will say only the 2 true things, the way I always have. The first is that I am proud of you past the bearing of it, and that your mother and father would be perfectly unbearable, and that the rowan bloomed for you out of season because even an old tree could see what you were, and the second is the oldest one. She held his face in both her hands. "I will not lie to you, not ever, and so hear me say a good thing and a true one, the same as I said it on the first night. There is a fire always lit for you, and a door that does not lock, and a stern old woman who is yours for good and for keeps, witnessed by a tree, and none of that gets on the train and none of it stays behind, because it goes wherever you go in here, where no hat and no headmaster and no dark wizard can ever sort it out of you. Now go and be a person to someone who needs one. I shall see you at the feast. Mind the milk goes in last." Harry hugged her hard in front of the whole staring platform and not caring in the least, and then he climbed aboard with Neville and Trevor and Hedwig and the sergeant and his father's broom and his mother's eyes, and he found an empty compartment and let down the window, and the train began to move. She did not wave. She was not a woman who waved. She stood very straight on the platform in her traveling cloak, tall and gray and entirely herself, and she watched the scarlet engine carry her son away into the life she had stolen back for him, with a name and a wand and a key and a wall he had built himself in the good clear light, and Harry leaned out of the window and watched her grow small and steady against the steam until the train took the bend and she was gone. He sat back. Neville across the compartment said, a little odd, "Your mum's Professor McGonagall," and Harry said, "Yes," and grinned, his father's grin in his mother's face, and meant the single word more completely than he had ever meant anything in his life. Then he drew his new wand, the holly and the phoenix feather, warm and right in his, and he leaned across the rattling compartment toward the toad that was already inching toward the gap under the door. "Right then," he said, "Trevor. Let's start with the tethering charm like I promised. First spell I do at Hogwarts, and it's going to be a kindness for a friend, which is, between us, exactly how my mum would want it." And he set to teaching Neville Longbottom the small, useful magic that keeps the people you love from getting away from you, while the Scottish hills gathered on the horizon and the train carried them north toward the castle and the hat and the whole bright beginning of it, and somewhere ahead, at a high table, a stern gray woman was already setting a place. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The Sorting Harry had seen Hogwarts 100 times, but he had never seen it from the water, and he understood, the moment the little boat slid out from under the trees, why they made every first year arrive this way. The lake lay black and still under a sky gone the deep blue of the last of the light, and the castle stood up out of the far shore on its crag, every window lit, 1,000 small gold fires stacked into towers against the dark, doubled in the water below so that it seemed to hang suspended between two skies. He had walked those corridors in summer when they were empty and gray and ordinary, when the castle was just his mother's enormous drafty workplace, and he knew which staircase liked to change on a Tuesday. He had not known it could look like this. He had not known that the place he had treated his whole life as a second home could, from the right angle in the right light, full to its battlements with waiting fire, look like the answer to a question he had been asking since he was 4. "Blimey," breathed Neville beside him in the boat, holding Trevor with both hands and the new tethering charm besides, and a round-faced girl across from them said nothing at all, only stared, and a boy with a great deal of freckles said "blimey" too, as though it were the only word the castle left a person. Harry said nothing. He had learned from a stern woman over a great many years that there were moments a person should simply let happen to him, and that the trick of a full life was knowing which ones. He let the castle happen to him. He was a Potter and a McGonagall, heir to 2 houses and the last of an older line besides, with a wand that had chosen him and a key warm at his throat and a wall he had built himself in the good clear light, and he sat very still in a little boat and let the lit towers of his mother's castle fill him up, and somewhere behind one of those 1,000 gold windows, he knew, a stern gray woman was setting a place for him, and the knowing was the steadiest thing he carried across the water. The boat slid into a dark underground harbor beneath the castle, and the first years clambered out onto rock, and Hagrid led them up, vast and kind and smelling of wood smoke, holding a lamp the size of Harry's head, and Harry liked him at once, as he had liked Hedwig's disdain and Gornuk's exactness, on the strength of a thing being entirely and unapologetically itself. They came up a passage of damp stone and out at last into the entrance hall, where the torches blazed and the ceiling soared past the reach of the light, and a marble staircase climbed away into the castle Harry knew in his bones. The first years bunched together, shivering and small, and the sound of the school beyond the great doors of the hall came through to them, 1,000 voices and the clink of gold plate, and the others went pale at it, and Harry stood easy in the middle of them, because he had eaten in that hall in summer with his feet up on the bench and treacle tart he had not strictly been allotted, and a hall holds no terror for a person who has put his feet on its furniture. And then Professor McGonagall came down the marble stair to meet them, and Harry watched his mother become someone else, and it was one of the strangest and finest things he had ever seen. She was not here, the woman who made the porridge. She was not leanen and milk-classed, and the hand warm on the back of his neck. She was Professor McGonagall, deputy headmistress, in her emerald robes with her hair scraped back and her spectacles flashing in the torchlight, tall and gray and entirely terrible, and the whole shivering knot of first years went silent the instant she appeared, the way a field goes silent when the hawk's shadow crosses it. She let the silence sit a moment, because she had told Harry once that the first silence is the most useful thing a teacher owns, and a fool spends it talking. Then she gave them the speech she had given to 1,100 frightened children before them, about the 4 houses, and the points and the family each house would become, in a voice that managed to be stern and welcoming at once, and not one of them so much as breathed out of turn. Her eyes passed over the group as she spoke, professional, impartial, weighing each of them as she weighed everything. And when they reached Harry in the middle of the crowd, they did not linger, and they did not soften, and to anyone watching she gave her son no more attention than the freckled boy or the round-faced girl. But Harry was not anyone watching. Harry had spent 7 years learning to read the smallest weather of that face, and he saw it, the flick, the half-beat, the thing that lived for an instant at the very corner of her mouth and was gone before it could be named. The private message passed across a crowded hall in a language only the two of them spoke. "I see you, I am here. Mind the milk goes in last." And he gave her back in the same silent language the lift of his chin that meant, "I know, and I'm steady, and watch this," and her eyes moved on, and no one in the entire entrance hall had the least idea that a whole conversation had just happened in front of them. "The sorting will begin momentarily," she said to all of them. "Wait here." And she swept away through the great doors, and the freckled boy whispered to Harry, "How do you reckon they do it?" "My brothers said you have to fight a troll," and Harry, who knew exactly how they did it, said gravely, "I heard you have to make a hat like you," which was both more reassuring and more true, and the freckled boy looked enormously relieved, and that was Ron Weasley met, in the manner Harry met everyone, by being a person to someone who needed one. They were led into the hall in a line, between the long tables of the 4 houses, under the ceiling that showed the night sky and the 1,000 floating candles, and Harry walked it with his head up, and the whispers came, of course, the name passing down the tables like wind through barley. "Potter, that's Potter and McGonagall's, they say she raised him." It broke over him and ran off, because he had grown his skin against it years ago, and because at the high table, set above the hall on its dais, his mother was taking her seat beside the headmaster, and that was the only part of the room he truly saw. The hat sang. It sang of the 4 houses, brave Gryffindor and wise Ravenclaw, loyal Hufflepuff and shrewd Slytherin, the same song in substance it had sung for 1,000 years, and the hall clapped, and then it fell still on its stool, and Professor McGonagall unrolled a long scroll, and the sorting began. Harry watched it as he watched everything, completely learning the shape of it. Abbot Hannah went to Hufflepuff after a moment's thought, and the yellow table roared and made room. Bones Susan followed her, and a sandy boy went to Ravenclaw so fast the brim had barely touched his hair. A pale boy with a pointed face and a drawl Harry could hear from 3 places back, one Draco Malfoy, was barely on the stool before the hat flung him to Slytherin, and the green table clapped in the cool measured manner of a house that considers enthusiasm slightly beneath it. A pair of identical twins were split between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, and pulled outraged faces at each other across the aisle. The line shortened name by name, and the nervous shuffling of the unsorted grew worse rather than better, as their numbers dwindled and the odds of being next climbed, and Harry, who was not nervous, found that he could feel the nerves of the others coming off them like heat, and felt for them every one, because not one of them had been told the night before by a stern woman banking a fire that wherever the hat put them would be where they belonged. They had come to this without that. Most children did. It was, he thought, watching a tiny girl tremble her way to Hufflepuff, the loneliest thing in the room, and the thing he most wanted to fix, and could not yet, except by being kind one child at a time, which was, his mother had taught him, how every large kindness is actually built, there being no other way to build one. And then, far sooner than he had braced for, came the name that mattered nearly as much to him as his own. Longbottom Neville. Neville went so white that for a moment Harry thought he might be sick, and he stumbled on the step up to the stool, and the hall did the cruel small thing halls do, the ripple of not quite stifled laughter, and Harry felt the old fierce protectiveness rise in him like a tide. He could not cross the hall, he could not fight the laughter for his friend. So he did the only thing he could, which was to fix his eyes on Neville, and when Neville's terrified gaze swept the crowd looking for any anchor at all, to be there, steady, mouthing the words clear enough to read across the stone, "You're brave. I know it. Hat'll know it too." Neville swallowed. He climbed onto the stool. The hat came down over his eyes, and there was a long pause, a very long pause, longer than most, the hat deliberating over a boy the world had written off as soft, and Harry stood in the line of waiting children and willed it, as he had once willed warmth into a guttering fire for a tired old woman, tending to it with the whole of himself. Look harder, look all the way down. His parents were the bravest people who ever lived, and it's in him, look. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. And the scarlet table roared, and Neville Longbottom, who had expected Hufflepuff at best and a polite suggestion that he go home at worst, sat for one stunned second with the hat still on his head before Professor McGonagall lifted it off with a hand that was, to anyone who knew her, just a fraction gentler than the office strictly required, and Neville stumbled to the cheering table glowing like a coal and found, halfway there, the presence of mind to look back at Harry in the line. And Harry grinned at him, his father's grin, and Neville grinned back, and a friendship that would last the rest of both their lives put down its first true root in the stone floor of the Great Hall. Then there were others, Macmillan and Moon and the pale Malfoy boys, two broad silent shadows, and then at last into a hall that had been waiting for it all evening, holding its collective breath through every paddle and perks. Potter McGonagall, Harry. The hall did not whisper. The hall fell silent, which was worse, 1,100 people leaning forward at once, and the name itself ran through them like a current, because they had all expected Potter, the boy who lived, the legend, and what the scroll had given them was Potter McGonagall. The two names yoked, the legend and the stern deputy headmistress they had all feared and respected for years, and the joining of them rearranged something in the room's understanding that it had not known needed rearranging. The story they had carried about in their heads had a second name on it now, and the second name was the most no-nonsense witch in Scotland, and a legend with Minerva McGonagall standing behind it was a very different and much less comfortable thing to gossip about. Harry walked to the stool. He did not hurry, and he did not dawdle. He passed below the high table, and he did not look up at his mother, because he had learned that the strongest thing two people who love each other can do in a watching crowd is to trust the bond enough not to need to check it. He sat. He let Professor McGonagall lower the hat onto his head, and her fingers brushed his hair for the briefest instant in a manner that was not in any teacher's manual, and then the brim came down over his eyes and the hall went away and there was only the dark inside the hat and a voice that spoke directly into the center of him. "Well, well," said the sorting hat. "Now here's a thing I have not had on this stool in 1,000 years of sortings. Let me look at you properly. Yes. Oh, this is interesting. I'm told you sort us," Harry thought, because he had never in his life met a voice he did not immediately want to interrogate. "So sort me. But I'd like to understand how, if you don't mind. I'd like to know what you're weighing." The hat made a sound that in a person would have been a laugh. "And there it is, the first of you, the asking. A mind that cannot meet a closed door without wanting to know the make of the lock. Ravenclaw would have you in a heartbeat and never let you go. You would be happy there, Harry Potter McGonagall, happy among the towers of thought your mother promised you, climbing them and knocking them down for the pure joy of the climbing. There is more of the eagle in you than the world will ever guess, because the world is too busy looking at your forehead to look at your eyes. I know, thought Harry, I'd be all right in Ravenclaw. What else do you see?" "Cunning," said the hat, and there was relish in it. "Oh, more than is comfortable. You reclaimed an estate from the most powerful wizard in Britain before you were 9. You learned the make of a great man's locks, and you opened them one by one, the gold and the seat and the cloak and the words he would not give you, and you did it without hate, which is the most dangerous cunning of all, the kind that keeps its head. Slytherin would make you a king. You have the ambition for it, whatever you tell yourself, not for gold, not for power, but for that wall you are forever building, the one that keeps the next child out of the cupboard. That is the largest ambition I have heard out of a head this small in a very long time, and Salazar's house is where the large ambitions go to be sharpened." Harry sat with that in the dark and did not flinch from it, because he had been raised to look at the dangerous things in good light. "You're right," he thought. "Want to build something so big it can't be torn down, that's ambition. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, just because the word frightens people." "No," said the hat, proving. "You don't pretend. That is the McGonagall in you. She raised you not to flinch from your own reflection, which is the rarest gift a guardian ever gives a child, and the very one her great colleague at the high table never received and has paid for all his long life." It turned ruminative. "And loyalty. Goodness, the loyalty. You would die for a stern old woman and a fierce small elf and a one-armed soldier, and you have already today gone to war in your own heart for a frightened boy with a toad whom you met 3 weeks ago. Hufflepuff would love you and you would love it back, and there is no shame in that house whatever the snobs say, only a great deal of unfashionable decency, which is the thing the world is always shortest of. So I could go anywhere," Harry thought. "That's what you're telling me. I'm not one thing." "No one worth sorting ever is," said the hat. "That is the secret we keep, we hats, that the houses are not boxes but choices, and that the choosing is the whole of the point. So, I could put you in any of the 4 and you would do that house credit, and the house would do you good, and your mother, I promise you, would be proud at that high table whatever color you ended the night wearing. I can read her from here, and she has decided in advance not to mind, which is its own kind of love." A pause waited. "But you have a preference, I can feel it. You have had a preference since you stepped off the boat. You are too honest to hide it from a hat, so let us not waste each other's time. Tell me, where do you want to go, and more to the point, why? The why is the only part I cannot read for myself." Harry thought about it. He thought about it properly, as he thought about the matchstick, attending to it, because the hat had given him the choice, and a choice taken lightly is a choice wasted. Gryffindor, he thought. Not because it's her house, though it is, and not because the old man wants it, because he does, and that's nearly a reason to go elsewhere out of spite, except that I won't make a single decision in my life out of spite for him, because that would be letting him steer me by walking backward. He's not allowed to steer me at all, not even in reverse. Then why, said the hat, intent now, because of what you said. The wall. Harry's thought came clear and cold and certain, the marble running down the matchstick. I'm not going to Hogwarts to climb towers of thought, though I'll climb them anyway in my spare time because I can't help it. I'm not going to be a king, though I could be. I'm going because there are 1,100 children in this castle, and most of them have never been told the truth by a grown-up in their lives, and most of them think the way it is the way it has to be, and some of them are in cupboards I can't even see. The house that goes into the dark to pull people out of the fire isn't the clever one or the cunning one or the kind one. It's the brave one. It's the one that runs toward the thing everyone else runs away from. I can be clever and cunning and loyal in any house, but if I'm going to spend my life building the wall that keeps people out of the cupboard, I'd better learn to be brave on purpose with people watching where it costs something. And there's only one house that teaches that as its whole entire point. So Gryffindor, because that's where they keep the courage, and courage is the only one of the four I'm still frightened I haven't got enough of, and you go toward the thing you're frightened of. She taught me that with a matchstick. The hat was silent for a long moment, and then it said very quietly, so that only Harry could hear, in a voice that had sorted 1,000 years of children and was not often surprised by any of them. Lily Evans gave you her eyes. James Potter gave you his nerve. But Minerva McGonagall gave you that, and that is the finest thing in you, and she made it out of porridge and patience and a great deal of being there in the morning, and it is worth more than the eyes and the nerve and the gold and the cloak and the whole legend they have hung on your forehead put together. Go on then, go toward the thing you're frightened of. You'll find you have more than enough of it. And then aloud to the waiting hall, so loud that the rafters rang with it, Gryffindor, the scarlet table came apart. It cheered for Neville, they detonated for Harry, the boy who lived in the son of their own fearsome head of house both at once, and the noise rolled up to the enchanted ceiling and rattled the floating candles in their hundreds. But Harry, lifting the hat from his own head before Professor McGonagall could quite reach it, a small breach of protocol that made the nearest students gasp and the hat itself chuckle, was not looking at the roaring table. He was looking at the high table. He was looking at his mother. Minerva McGonagall sat very straight in her place beside the headmaster, in her emerald robes, with the whole hall thundering, and she did not cheer, because she was not a woman who cheered, any more than she was a woman who waved. But Harry, who had spent 7 years learning the smallest weather of that face, watched her bring one hand up slowly and press the backs of 2 fingers against her lips for the length of a single breath, the gesture of a person who has been filled past the safe line and has decided, just this once, in front of 1,100 children, not to fight it. Her eyes were very bright. They were fixed on him and on nothing else in the world, and they said, in the silent language only the two of them spoke, the thing she had said on the first night and the last evening and 1,000 mornings in between, the good thing and the true one. There you are, oh Lenin, there you are. And Harry put the hat down on the stool and grinned at her across the whole length of the great hall, his father's grin in his mother's eyes, and went to his house. He sat down beside Neville at the Gryffindor table, and the freckled boy, Ron, was sorted there too a few names later, and flopped down across from them, with the boneless relief of a child who has not, after all, had to fight a troll. A bossy, bushy-haired girl named Hermione Granger arrived primly at Gryffindor and informed them all that she had read about the sorting in Hogwarts, a history, and had not believed the troll rumor for a single second, and Harry decided he liked her, because she had clearly built a wall of her own out of books and facts against a world that had made her feel strange, and he knew that wall and respected the builder of it. The 4 of them fell into the easy, quarrelsome closeness of children who are going to matter enormously to one another, without any of them knowing it yet, and it began, the way the best things do, over the question of whether you could transfigure a chicken into a chicken that was also somehow better, which Hermione said was theoretically incoherent, and Harry said his mother had a paper on, and Ron said only mad people thought about that sort of thing at dinner, and Neville laughed, properly laughed. For what Harry suspected was the first time all year. The feast appeared on the golden plates, and it was, Harry was pleased to confirm, even better than the kitchen elves' summer version, and the treacle tart, when it came, was sublime. And above it all, on the dais, the headmaster rose to give his start-of-term word. Albus Dumbledore stood, old and stooped and bright-eyed, and the hall fell quiet for him as it had fallen quiet for centuries, and he spoke of the forbidden forest and the caretaker's list of banned items, and a corridor on the 3rd floor that was out of bounds to anyone who did not wish to die a very painful death, the ordinary liturgy of a Hogwarts September. And then just at the end his eyes found Harry at the Gryffindor table, and the steel came up gentle beneath the kindliness, and he said to the whole school and not to the whole school, "We have this year a number of remarkable new students, as we do every year, for every child is remarkable to someone, and it is the great privilege of a school to be the someone for a time. I will say only this to all of you old and new, you will be taught a great many facts in this castle. But the most important thing you will learn here, if you are fortunate in your teachers, is how to think, which is a different and a more dangerous thing than knowing, and not every powerful person in the world is glad when the young learn to do it." He paused, and something moved behind the half-moon spectacles, and Harry understood that it was, in its strange way, a surrender and an apology, and a passing of something from an old man to a boy who had refused to be made into a weapon. "I find in my old age that I have come round to being glad of it after all. Better late, the proverb says, than never. Tuck in." And he sat, and the feast went on, and across the breadth of the great hall, under the floating candles and the painted stars, a boy who had once been kept in a cupboard caught the eye of the woman who had carried him out of it, and the two of them held the look for a moment over the heads of 1,100 children and an old defeated wizard and the whole bright clamor of the beginning, saying nothing, needing to say nothing, the thing between them louder than any cheer. The Gryffindor prefect led them up afterward, full and sleepy, through the shifting staircases that Harry could have walked blind, to a portrait of a fat lady in pink who demanded a password and swung open on the round red common room, all firelight and squashy armchairs and lion banners, and Harry stood in it and thought that he could be happy here, that it was a good warm room full of his house, and that it was not, all the same, his home. Because his home had a lock and a rowan and a stern grey woman in it, and a common room, however warm, is not that. He climbed to the dormitory at the top of the tower, where 5 four-poster beds stood in a ring with their scarlet hangings, and his trunk had been brought up, H.J. Pottermcgall on the brass plate, and the sergeant was already standing on the windowsill where Tilly, who had clearly been and gone unseen in the manner of devoted elves, had set him to keep watch over the new room. Neville had the next bed, and Ron beyond him, and 2 other boys, Dean and Seamus, loud and friendly and already arguing about Quidditch, and Harry liked them and unpacked and put his parents' photograph on the table by his bed where the morning light would find it, and lay down in a bed that was his among 4 that were not, in a tower in a castle full of strangers, and found that he could not sleep. It was not the old wakefulness, it was not fear. It was the new kind, the full of light kind, the kind that had kept him up the last night at Cairnloch, except that tonight it had a question folded inside it, and the question would not let him be, whether the thing she had promised was true here too. A fire always lit, a door that does not lock. She had said it on a platform that morning in front of the whole staring world. He believed her. He had believed her since he was 4. But there is a difference between believing a thing and knowing it all the way down, and Harry had decided, lying in the dark, that he was not going to spend his first night in this castle wondering, when the answer was a corridor and a few staircases away. So he did the thing he had never quite let himself do. He reached into his trunk in the dark and drew out the cloak, his father's cloak, 700 years of Potter's, come home from a great man's keeping, and he swung it about his shoulders, and the rest of him stopped being there. And he slipped out past the sleeping boys and down the stairs and out through the portrait hole, a patch of nothing moving through the dark castle, and he went, sure-footed on staircases that knew him, down through the sleeping school toward the corridor where his mother kept her rooms. There was a fire lit. He could see the line of gold under her door from the end of the corridor. Of course there was. He stood outside it, an invisible boy in an enormous castle, on the first night of the rest of his life, and he found he did not even need to knock, because the door opened before he reached it, and Minerva McGonagall stood in it in her tartan dressing gown with her hair down grey about her shoulders, looking exactly as she had on 100 ordinary mornings, and she looked straight at the patch of nothing where he stood as though the cloak were so much gauze. "I am a transfiguration mistress of 40 years, Harry James," she said, dry as ever, "and you are breathing like a boy who has run down 4 flights of stairs. Cloak or no cloak, did you imagine I would not know my own son standing in my own doorway? Come in out of the corridor. The kettle is on. I rather thought you might come the first night. I have been wrong about a great many things in my life. I am pleased to report I was not wrong about that." He pulled the cloak off, and there he was, and there she was, and the fire was lit, and the kettle was on. And on the little table sat 2 cups too, because she had set them out on the chance, and Harry crossed the room and hugged her hard, as he had on the platform that morning, in the hearthrug 2 years before, in a kitchen 7 years gone, and she held him, in a castle full of 1,100 sleeping children and 1 old defeated wizard, and neither of them said anything for a while. Because there was nothing that needed saying that the fire and the kettle and the 2 cups had not already said. "Gryffindor," she said at last, into his hair, and there was something in her voice she did not trouble to hide here where no one watched. "You chose it. I watched you choose it. I have sat at that table for 40 years and watched the hat sort 1,100 children, and I have never once been able to tell what any of them were thinking under it. And tonight I watched my son sit there for a full 2 minutes arguing with a 1,000-year-old hat, and I knew exactly that you were choosing, and that you were choosing hard, and that whatever you chose would be right because you were the one choosing it freely. That is the whole of it, Harry. That is everything I wanted on a Surrey doorstep when you put your cold hand in mine. Not Gryffindor, not the gold or the name or the marks you'll get or the wars you may yet have to fight, just that. A child who chooses freely in good light. I have it. You gave it to me tonight in front of the whole school and did not even know it was a gift. It was her house too, Harry said into the tartan. Wasn't it, my mum, Gryffindor? It was. Head girl of it and the bravest student I ever taught, and she chose it for very nearly the same reasons you just argued at a hat. I would put my wand on it. You are so like her it stops my breath some days, and so like him, the dreadful boy with that grin. She held him back at arm's length and looked at him, her boy, in his new scarlet-trimmed robes in her firelit office in the castle she had brought him home to. And then she crossed to the writing desk and opened a drawer she kept locked and took out a thing wrapped in tissue gone soft with 11 years of careful handling, and she held it a moment before she gave it over. I told you when you were 6, she said, that your mother wrote to me when you were born, a letter so full of joy it had 3 exclamation marks in the first line. I told you I had kept it and that I would show you one day. I have been waiting all this while for the right day. I rather think this is it, the day you chose her house freely under your own name and hers. Here, she put it into his hands. It is yours now, not mine. It was always going to be yours. I only kept it warm. Harry unfolded his mother's letter, 11 years old, in a hand he had never seen but somehow knew, the loops in the haste of a young woman too happy to be tidy, and he read in the firelight in the castle on the first night of the rest of his life. He has James's hair already, can you believe it? The whole black mess of it, in my eyes, Minerva, he has my eyes. He is the most ridiculous and perfect thing, and I am writing this at 3 in the morning because I cannot stop looking at him. He read it twice, he read it 3 times. And his mother on the dresser at Cairnloch, and his mother in his own green eyes, and his mother in 3 exclamation marks at 3 in the morning 11 years gone all came together in him at once. And Minerva McGonagall did the thing she did so rarely, and put her arms around her son and let him have his grief and his joy together, the way they always came, and did not tell him to stop, and did not, herself, trouble to keep her own face steady here, where only the fire could see. Now, she said at last, gently, when he had folded the letter and put it in his pocket over his heart, where it would stay. You will drink 1 cup of tea because the ritual must be observed, and then you will go back up to that tower under your father's cloak before some prefect finds an empty bed and raises the school, and you will sleep because you have lessons in the morning and I will be teaching the first of them, and I do not give my own son an inch of mercy in my classroom, as you are about to discover to your considerable sorrow. She turned to the kettle. Milk first or last? Last, said Harry, sitting down in the chair that was, he understood, going to be his chair, the way the stool by the window at Cairnloch was his and the bed under the eaves was his, a thing she had quietly made his without either of them remarking on it. Last, always, milk first is barbarism. It is a way of life, Minerva agreed, and poured, milk last, into the 2 cups, in a warm room a corridor away from where her son would sleep. On the first night of the rest of a life she had crossed a war and defied a great man and rewritten a dead woman's stolen wishes to give him. And outside the window the castle slept, and far to the north above a black loch, a rowan tree that had bloomed out of season for the binding of a family stirred heavy with its late berries, guarding an empty house where a fire would be kept lit and a door would not be locked against his coming home at Christmas. And here now in the firelight, a stern grey woman and the son she had chosen drank their tea the only correct way, and were the both of them, against every odd the world had stacked, and for good, and witnessed by a tree, entirely and at last and all the way down, a family. Chapter 7 End.